The Bard of Hogwarts. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 326 Pre-match interview and wand testing. Time seemed to slip by unnoticed, day by day. It was quickly approaching the end of November. On the morning before the tournament, all the champions were summoned to a dedicated classroom in the castle. According to Triwizard tournament tradition, the champions' wands were inspected before entering. On the second floor of the castle, a spacious classroom awaited. Most of the desks had been stacked at the back, leaving ample space at the front. However, in the front, 3 desks sat side by side, covered in a red velvet tapestry. Behind the table stood 6 high-backed chairs. Since wands were being inspected, Ollivander, the only master wandmaker in the British Isles, was naturally present. Also present were 5 judges, 3 headmasters, including Dumbledore, and the 2 heads of the department, Bagman and Barty Crouch Sr. It's worth noting that, while the others remained indifferent, Bagman, the head of magical sports, was the only one with a look of excitement, seemingly eager to begin. In the classroom, Harry sat aside, quietly observing everything around him. After the most rigorous training, he was now able to discern everyone's movements without blinking. Meanwhile, Ino, having noticed Harry's gaze from the beginning, was alert, even a little nervous, looking like a moody. He didn't see this as a bad thing, though. In the original story, Harry's biggest flaw was his recklessness. Now, with his cautious approach, he might avoid a lot of unnecessary trouble. Warriors, time is running out. If possible, please come up in order. After all, you will need to face an interview with the Daily Prophet later. Bagman, the head of the Department of Magical Sports and Physical Education, stood up and continued, half-jokingly, "Of course, there's no particular order. If you want to draw lots, I can do that right now." However, after glancing around, Bagman couldn't help but glance at Ino. There was nothing he could do. In his sight, the other 3 warriors all looked a little off. Crumb, with his expression blank, Fleur, acting delicately, and Harry, who was extremely vigilant. "All right. Since there's no order, I'll go first." Facing Bagman's gaze, Ino slowly stood up and walked to the long velvet table, handing his wand to the gray-haired Ollivander. "Long time no see, Mr. Ollivander." "Yes. Long time no see. I still remember the story of Mother Elder." Ollivander carefully took the wand. After examining it for a moment, he whispered, there was no need to check it, but they insisted, saying it's the rules. It seemed as if he didn't approve of this kind of inspection. Although Ollivander's voice was low, it was just loud enough for the few present to hear. Fortunately, Ollivander had some sense of propriety, stopping with just one word, and then turning his gaze back to the wand before him. He gripped the wand with one hand, and as it sliced through the air, a beautiful elderberry flower bloomed from the tip. Elderwood shaft, phoenix tail feather core, 12 inches long, reasonably flexible. Ollivander recited the wand's details like the back of his hand, then handed it to Bagman beside him. Bagman took the wand, briefly glancing at it before passing it to Barty Crouch Sr. However, an interesting scene unfolded. Unlike the routine work of the 2 directors of the Ministry of Magic, the 3 headmasters' reactions were quite different. Karkaroff, upon receiving the wand, acted as if it were a fragile object. He gently lifted it with both hands and quickly handed it to Madame Maxime. The striking headmistress, naturally, was not as cautious as Karkaroff, as her attention was not focused on the wand at all. Madame Maxime looked at the students before her, unable to conceal her admiration and regret. Faced with such a blunt gaze, Ino was well aware of the reason. He had recently visited the Booksburton's carriage, delivering a book while politely declining the offer. It seemed Maxime still hadn't given up. Fortunately, now wasn't the time for a chat. Madame Maxime pinched her wand between 2 fingers and handed it to Dumbledore. Under the gaze of the others, Dumbledore, like a child discovering a new toy, immediately pulled out his own wand. 2 nearly identical wands lay on the table. They were truly alike, from color to length, even down to the knots on the bonewood shafts. Dumbledore hid the 2 wands under the table, then pulled them out again a moment later, smiling. "Guess which one's yours?" Faced with this childish, almost childish trick, Ino didn't expose it. Instead, he examined them with interest. "You can't tell from the outside." Ino stroked his chin with one hand, feigning contemplation. "Ha ha ha, I knew you wouldn't guess it." Dumbledore laughed happily, as if his prank had succeeded. However, the two men's echoing conversation left everyone else with helpless expressions. Ollivander, in particular, was a bit furious. After all, a wizard failing to recognize their own wand was, in his opinion, the ultimate failure. Considering that there were people waiting behind him, Ino couldn't waste any more time and said with a smile, "Even though I can't tell them apart, my wand blooms." As he finished speaking, one of the two nearly identical ones on the table actually blossomed with small white flowers. Seeing the joke was over, Bagman stood up again. "Mr. Swinburne, please proceed to the second classroom on your left. There, a special correspondent for the Daily Prophet will be interviewing you." Meanwhile, as Bagman spoke, Rita, in the second classroom to the left, seemed somewhat distracted. As a special correspondent for the Daily Prophet, her talent allowed her to learn many hidden secrets. But the more she understood, the more frightened she became. The Ministry of Magic, once a place full of factions, now seemed to be tightly bound by an invisible spider web, even twisted into a rope. This sounded ridiculous, but as a gold medal reporter with more than a decade of experience, Rita was keenly aware of the problem. She knew too well what kind of results would be represented by some subtle changes. Perhaps, it seemed nothing now, but that was just the time not right. "I hope I can catch up," Rita whispered to herself in the empty classroom. The thought that the instigator of all this would soon be the subject of an interview made her feel a little uneasy. Her golden hair swung back and forth unconsciously. Chapter 327 Fame and Price. In an empty classroom. "Ms. Rita, don't be so reserved. Relax. This is just an ordinary interview." Ino sighed at the annoying reporter from the original story. She had been so arrogant in the story, but now she looked like a schoolgirl, apprehensive. "Yes, sir. Please take a seat." Meanwhile, after a brief adjustment, Rita also slowly relaxed. "Is there anything special I should be aware of for this interview?" As she spoke, Rita pressed down the automatic writing quill. "No, just write whatever you want." Ino shook his head slightly. He didn't intend to interfere with other people's stories, and certainly wouldn't report illegal animagy. After all, a good story is always colorful, not black and white. Whether it's Rita or anyone else, playing their roles well within certain guidelines is perfectly acceptable. Besides, in any story, black and gray are essential. Then a short click sounded. The four warriors completed their final group photo, and Rita's interview concluded. Leaving the classroom, after a brief exchange of pleasantries with the other three, Ino headed straight for his dorm. As the first to complete the interview, he had watched Rita's performance in its entirety, and had also witnessed a brilliant prose of this award-winning reporter. Despite witnessing everything, he didn't intervene. It was like Mr. Lovegood's magazine, a counter-argument. The wizarding world always needs a different perspective. Back in his dorm, Ino glanced at the bedside clock. It was 11:30 a.m. It was truly bizarre. A wand test plus the photo and interview had already gone by 2 hours without him noticing. Even stranger, though, was the fact that he hadn't felt anything before checking the time, but once he did, a faint drowsiness crept in. Since he was feeling sleepy, he followed his body's cues. A nap was inevitable. Lying in bed, Ino pondered tomorrow's events. Marcus and the others had worked through Bagman's connections to change the original competition. Even for the sake of spectacle, the first dragon race was changed from a fight for the golden egg to a full-scale battle within a set time frame. The event had changed, and so had the warrior's state. Or rather, Harry's state had noticeably changed. Unlike the days when he'd pretended to be Moody's helper, Harry now felt noticeably different, even maintaining a vigilant presence while walking, sitting, and lying down. Thoughts drifted through his mind, and gradually, Ino closed his eyes. Absolute tranquility descended upon the dormitory. While Ino napped, the Daily Prophet once again demonstrated its extreme efficiency. An hour before the interview concluded, a special newspaper covering the Triwizard Tournament was published. Though it consisted of only 2 pages, each 8 pages long, the content was every bit as captivating as Lockhart's adventure novels. The first page featured an enlarged photo of the warriors, beneath which appeared the ministry's expectations for the Triwizard Tournament and a message from Minister Fudge. Everything seemed normal, but the second page was interesting. There were stories like, a boy crying alone in the dark in the Gryffindor dormitories, a charming French girl flirting with various boys, a professional seeker with a dull expression, seemingly brain damaged by a quaffle. Harry, in particular, as the fourth champion, and with his fame in England, was undoubtedly the subject of much attention. While the interview wasn't long, Rita's writing was captivating, packing in all sorts of details. As a result, aside from the group photo and the minister's address on the first page, Harry dominated the remaining 7 pages, occupying 4 of them. With the help of an owl, the newspaper was quickly brought to Hogwarts. The 8th floor of the castle. The Gryffindor common room. Harry put down the newspaper and read the contents, feeling a burning, uncomfortable feeling of shame. He couldn't understand how Rita, the reporter, could write such a disgusting, lengthy article when his answers were all standard. At that moment, even without looking up, Harry could feel the strange looks from everyone around him. "Dude. Don't take it personally," Ron patted Harry's shoulder. "Trust me. That's the price of fame, and Rita's quite decent. She's kept herself clean." Ron read the newspaper, but his focus wasn't on the Warriors' gossip, but on Rita's writing style. Recently, there had been anecdotes about some idiot who'd spent real money to buy a castle. Although the piece of information only fetched 2 nuts, it had given him a lucrative opportunity. It didn't matter if there wasn't hot news, he could just emulate Rita and make it up on the spot. While there were risks in basing stories on hearsay, just like when he'd fabricated Hermione being caught red-handed last year, Ron had also witnessed a new technique through Rita's exquisite writing. She could easily pin the entire incident on a single, seemingly unrelated person. Just like the article mentioned, a certain unnamed Hufflepuff, a boy with a crush on Harry. The common room. Harry didn't know what Ron was thinking, but he understood something else. Fame comes at a price. "I don't want to be famous. I just want to go to school quietly, play Quidditch occasionally, and no one ever asks me how I feel." He glanced at the newspaper, the headlines and photos on it piercing him at that moment. The Daily Prophet was like a piece of wood doused with kerosene, fueling the already blazing flames in the castle. Especially that evening, to celebrate the first match tomorrow, Gryffindor even threw a lively banquet. In the colorful common room, thanks to the generous sponsorship of George and Fred, all kinds of sweets and drinks were brought in free of charge. Harry was surrounded by everyone, and he could only force a smile in response to the enthusiastic well wishes. After the banquet began, Harry found his chance to quietly leave the common room. Amid the jubilation, no one seemed to notice. But seconds after Harry left, Ginny stood up and walked towards the portrait of the fat lady. "Ziote shares magic today. Flagret is a kind of fireline that can produce burning in the air. It can be drawn into a specific shape or form words with a magic wand, and it will last for a period of time." Chapter 328 Glory to Hogwarts. Gryffindor. The bustling common room. Ginny chased Harry out. Perhaps the others didn't notice, but Hermione watched the whole thing. A smile of relief and blessing quietly appeared on her cheeks. Of her few friends, Hermione knew full well that Ginny's love for Harry was genuine, not just because of his supposed savior reputation. Perhaps that had been part of the reason at first, but with Harry's popularity waning in the past 2 years, Ginny was the only one who remained unchanged. But boys seemed so clueless, always unable to guess what a girl was thinking. But today, after seeing Ginny chase him out, she wholeheartedly wished her well. After all, it was truly difficult for a girl to actively pursue someone she liked, and Hermione knew that all too well. To witness her friend's happiness. Hermione sat alone on the sofa in the corner, legs crossed, holding an open can of butterbeer, glancing towards the common room entrance from time to time. As for the others, they remained immersed in the joyful atmosphere. About half an hour later, suddenly, the fat lady's portrait was opened. Harry and Ginny entered the entrance, a 2-person entrance only wide enough for 2 people. They walked hand in hand, unlike usual, this time holding hands. Hermione watched, happy for Ginny but also tinged with envy. "We haven't even held hands yet." She regretted it now. She shouldn't have given it too much thought in the room of requirement. If she had simply fallen into the room, it might have been more than just holding hands. Thinking this, Hermione pursed her lips and took another sip from her butterbeer. Meanwhile, unlike the Gryffindor feast, the Slytherin common room was quiet. Their long time together had taught them that Ino could be quite capricious. When he wanted to be lively, he'd come out and chat with everyone, tell stories, or even sing a song if he felt like it. But when he wasn't, even if they were from the same house, they might not see each other for an entire day. Today seemed to be no different. There were quite a few people sitting in the common room, but everyone kept a tacit silence. Tomorrow morning was the first match of the Triwizard Tournament, and they knew they likely wouldn't see the champions that morning. They wanted to offer their final blessings and encouragement, seemingly only tonight. However, after waiting for a long time, the corridor leading to the boys' dormitory remained empty. Slytherins, unlike the warm warmth of Gryffindors, the aloofness of Ravenclaws, or the stoicism of Hufflepuffs, were always reserved and introverted. But this was ultimately just a facade. When it came to emotions or when they wanted to accomplish something, Slytherins were more persistent, even obsessive. Just like today, everyone wanted to offer their blessings, but no one knocked. Even after nearly an hour, they still sat quietly in the common room, and no one left. Will he not come? Did someone see him go back to his dorm, or maybe he fell asleep? Daphne asked softly. Daphne's voice was quiet, but despite the surrounding silence, it still reached many people, causing a slight commotion in the common room. What do you think? Pansy chuckled, her gaze darting towards the boys' corridor. There are some people you can always trust. And above that, there's someone you can trust and believe in, and trust completely. Pansy didn't try to lower her voice, speaking freely and openly as if she were just chatting. Her words resonated deeply with the Slytherin family. Everyone present, save for this year's first years, deeply agreed with her words. This recognition wasn't blind admiration, but rather a trust born of established facts. Many present had witnessed Ino's promise, and it had been faithfully fulfilled. Harper Wake was one of them. A half-blood wizard, he had been sorted into Slytherin by the Sorting Hat upon his arrival in 1992. With the advent of the videoscope, he had risked everything at the Malfoy Manor party last year, investing his years of pocket money in a stake worth 2 galleons. Now, the dividend income alone has tripled the value of the 2 galleons. Despite the enormous benefits, Harper remained true to his promise. He didn't mind even sitting quietly for an hour. He would gladly sit for another hour, even 2. And throughout Slytherin, there are always many people like Harper. Even those who didn't attend the banquet for various reasons have contributed their modest efforts through various means, and they have also received corresponding rewards. Common room. A slight commotion caused by Daphne's words was instantly dispelled by another. Looking at the common room again, Pansy nodded slightly. She was pleased with everyone present. Slytherin should be united, not ungrateful. At the same time, soft footsteps suddenly sounded in the corridor leading to the boys' dormitory. I'm so sorry. I was delayed by something just now, and I didn't expect everyone to be waiting here. Ino looked around. The vast Slytherin common room was now almost completely packed, with some girls even crammed onto a single sofa. It seemed as if Salazar Slytherin hadn't imagined that over 1,000 years later, so many young wizards would be gathered in the Slytherin common room on the same day, at the same time. Seeing this, Ino raised his right hand slightly. Thank you for your support. Glory to Hogwarts. He didn't try to be sentimental, and his tone was calm, as if he were discussing the weather. But even these calm words resonated with many people. Glory to Hogwarts. A single person's voice might be quiet, but when dozens, hundreds, or even millions of people spoke together, their voices, though still calm, coalesced into an unquestionable conviction. In the dormitory. Ino leaned back in his chair. The scene in the common room just now made him begin to understand why Tom had gradually become Voldemort. A tragic childhood is one factor, but the shift in mentality during school seems to be crucial. A teenager with a mental age of 10, facing the admiration and adoration of so many, can easily become conceited and proud. And if that same teenager is also an orphan with a somewhat twisted personality, the consequences are predictable. But this isn't Slytherin's fault. If one must pinpoint a reason, it's probably simply because they lack the ability to withstand such fame. Chapter 329, The Vibrant Valley, Professor McGonagall's Instructions. The next morning, at the end of November, the temperature in the Scottish Highlands plummeted to below zero. Despite the chill, all the young wizards in the castle rose early. Everyone washed and dressed early, then grabbed the pre-prepared gear, enchanted banners, colorful fireworks, and, of course, Quidditch telescopes. Perhaps thanks to the World Cup, over 80% of the young wizards were armed with Quidditch telescopes. The remaining few fell into 2 categories: Muggle wizards who simply couldn't afford or obtain a magical telescope, and those with more expensive items, such as a cinemascope, a camera, or both. Colin was one of these. Last year, on the train, He had followed Ino and captured a Dementor from a perfect angle. The 12 photos not only earned him a reward, but also garnered the attention of the Daily Prophet. As a wizard of some note within the castle, Colin was juggling multiple roles today: the Daily Prophet, Mirror Media, and even Malfoy, who had visited the previous day. 3 commissions had him skipping breakfast and rushing to the Quidditch pitch early to secure a photoshoot. He'd thought he'd arrived early enough, but upon arriving, Colin noticed there were others who'd arrived earlier than him, and not just 1 or 2. A quiet glance around revealed that these people, both in their equipment and their demeanor, were new to the profession. This realization made Colin nervous. It seemed like more and more people were interested in pursuing a career in photojournalism, forcing him to seriously reconsider the offer Malfoy had made a few days earlier. Meanwhile, in the Slytherin dormitory, Ino, after washing up, made a rare use of the castle's privilege to have breakfast delivered to the dormitory by the house elves. Marcus has arranged 12 people to shoot from different angles, and I've also arranged some personnel. The first issue of the monthly magazine will be available by Christmas. Draco spoke, his eyes constantly glancing at the alarm clock beside him. Oh, right. Are the preparations you mentioned last night complete? Actually, I'd say there's no need to overthink it. Just focus on getting high scores. Of course, that's just my suggestion. Perhaps due to his excitement, Draco spoke rapidly and more than usual, becoming a bit nagging. Ino understood this and immediately pulled up his sleeves, revealing a nice blue bracelet on his wrist. Don't worry, we finished it last night. While scores are important, the visuals are what make it real. After saying this, Ino picked up the napkin from the table and wiped his mouth. The first battle with the dragon seemed to be a simple one-shot, but in reality, he had given it a lot of thought. First and foremost, the original purpose of the competition wasn't to intimidate. Therefore, he had largely abandoned any spells that could kill with a single blow, as well as the Boggart's black mist of fear. After much deliberation, the only options left were ice magic and transfiguration. That was precisely why he hadn't arrived at the common room last night. A snake-shaped bracelet? An alchemical artifact? Draco asked, puzzled. To his eyes, the ice blue bracelet looked more like a work of art, about 1/3 of an inch in diameter, connected end-to-end, a truly beautiful sight. An alchemical artifact? Perhaps. But I'm more convinced it's alive. Ino reached out and gently touched the bracelet's uneven scales, his mind replaying the dreamlike experience of last night. In fact, after deciding on ice magic and transfiguration as the primary themes, he'd thought of the sanctuary's original anaconda. A 70-foot ice anaconda, battling a fire dragon, would likely earn a perfect score in both size and visual impact. For this very reason, Ino had improvised a disguise for the anaconda, making it easier for it to enter the battle. But upon entering the sanctuary, he noticed a transformation truly surreal. The alchemical dolls Nicholas Flamel had gifted him, now were running around wildly, without the equivalent of vitality. In the valley, the red maple trees and the 3 oaks were now even beginning to show the faint outlines of their features. Even through transfiguration magic, the lifeless anaconda's eyes became alive. But the changes in the sanctuary went far beyond that. Every blade of grass, even the White House, the tables, chairs, benches, candlesticks, and teacups within, seemed to come alive. The first thing that struck Ino as the cause of all these changes was the winding rainbow river in the valley's sky. The only recent change to the sanctuary was the addition of a river. In fact, after careful observation, his suspicions were confirmed. The rainbow river in the sky was more than just a mere decoration. Like sunlight bathing the earth, it brought warmth and brightness, as well as boundless vitality. However, this vitality, unlike sunlight, adhered to no fixed rules. The colorful river in the sky, born from the pebbles collected by the children of Rohan, has become even more vibrant and inclusive. This energy is like that of a real child, as if in its size, whether it's a doll, a hat, or anything else, it can always be personified. Singing flowers, talking teacups, fleeing candlesticks, playful stools. Although Nico's puppet is the only one truly active in the valley right now, Ino is certain that with time, this place will eventually become more exciting. And at that moment, he also realized something belatedly. After 10 years in Middle-earth, the greatest reward was not the tulip that resembled the one that gave birth to the Ring of Fire. Rather, the greatest reward was these insignificant, almost abandoned stones. They are everywhere, ordinary. But in this ordinariness, there is a miracle. A fleeting memory. Ino pulled up his sleeve again, covering the bracelet transformed from the icy anaconda, and then turned his gaze to the alarm clock beside him. I have to go. Calculating the time, Professor McGonagall is already in the Great Hall. He stood up and gently patted Draco's shoulder. Honestly, Ino felt a sense of novelty about the upcoming match, like a storyteller who suddenly finds himself in a story. Leaving the common room. Walking along, Ino smiled and greeted the young wizards who passed by. Everything went smoothly, except for being stopped by a few Boxburton's girls at the corner. They not only asked for their autographs, but also surrounded them with enthusiastic French girls for a photo. Overall, it was a harmless experience. Entering the Great Hall, the first thing he saw was Professor McGonagall, who had been waiting for him, and Harry beside her. Thank goodness. I thought you overslept, but Harry is here early. Professor McGonagall looked as serious and calm as usual, but from the way she kept tucking her fallen hair back, it was clear that she wasn't as calm inside as she appeared. Sorry, Professor McGonagall, Ino said, nodding to Harry. All right. Don't be nervous. Professor McGonagall tucked her hair behind her ears again. Don't be afraid, I'll be watching the game from now on. But I have to say this, don't try to show off. At this point, Professor McGonagall looked at Harry sternly. As the head of Gryffindor, she noticed something different about Harry. He seemed full of energy. In the past, this would have been a positive thing, but facing a 5x dragon with such energy wasn't necessarily a good thing. She really didn't want another Circagander to emerge in Gryffindor 1,000 years from now. Remember, don't try to show off. If anything dangerous happens, this will give me time to make a rescue. This is my final request. Professor McGonagall's voice trembled slightly at the end, but she still finished her instructions word by word. All right, now, both of you, follow me. The warriors enter from the other side. There's still one chapter left, but it'll be delayed a bit. Zyodi is still revising it. It should be ready around 9 o'clock. Sorry, everyone. Chapter 330, The Battle of Ice and Fire. Led by Professor McGonagall, they bypassed the main entrance to the Quidditch pitch and arrived at a secluded, smaller gate. You'll have to go in on your own. Bagman is inside. Outside, Professor McGonagall gave the two of them a deep look. Finally, good luck to you. Thank you. Ino nodded earnestly, unlike Harry's nervousness, and walked in first. After passing through a narrow passage barely wide enough for one person, the space ahead opened up, revealing a spacious tent. Haha. Our Hogwarts champions are here. Come on in, we have less than a quarter of an hour to get ready. Bagman, the head of the Department of Magical Sports and Physical Education, stood up with a smile on his face, seemingly having waited for a long time. Though middle-aged, he looked energetic, as if he had aged 10 years. Thank you. Ino replied politely, then sat down on a nearby bench. Although he knew the head of the department had connections with Marcus, he didn't intend to engage in excessive small talk with Bagman in the current situation. After all, he was the referee, and acting too familiar could easily give off suspicions. Bagman, seemingly no fool, understood immediately after seeing Ino's reaction. He turned back toward the passageway. Hello, our fourth champion is here too. Harry Potter, he greeted enthusiastically, even more so than before. Crumb and Fleur exchanged a silent glance, their brows subtly furrowed. Meanwhile, Harry felt a strange irritation at Bagman's enthusiasm. He didn't like the term fourth champion. It sounded like someone extraneous to the Triwizard Tournament. Suppressing his displeasure, Harry nodded slightly and sat down on another bench. All right. Now that everyone's here, I should give you a brief introduction. I think this is redundant, but here's the procedure. Even after Harry's rebuff, Bagman remained cheerful, his expression even happier than if he'd found a galleon. That's the situation. For your safety, the maximum time the hourglass lasts is half an hour. Of course, you can give up at any time during this time. At the signal, 10 experienced dragon trainers will immediately take the stage. Don't worry. Bagman explained the rules and the emergency response plan while pulling out a small canvas bag from the cabinet behind him. Now, let's draw lots. This will determine the order in which you will go on stage, as well as the dragon species you will be assigned. In the tent, Ino saw the other three warriors pale after Bagman pulled out the bag. This was understandable, as the oldest of the three was only 17. No matter how talented a student was in school, Facing a 5x fire dragon would inevitably be a source of anxiety. I'll go first, if you don't mind. Ino slowly stood up and looked at the other 3 warriors. This was a spur-of-the-moment decision. The first to go on stage would inevitably face greater pressure. After all, unlike the Golden Egg fight in the original story, this fight was much more dangerous. If something went wrong, it would be truly regrettable. Bagman wasn't impressed by Ino's volunteering. He earned his commission from the sale of cinemascopes, so the order of appearances didn't matter to him. As for the other 3 warriors, upon hearing someone offer to lead, they instinctively nodded in agreement. Ino observed their performance, smiled, and approached Bagman, reaching for the bag containing the lottery. Soon, a palm-sized miniature dragon figurine appeared. Ooh! Norwegian Spinosaurus. Bagman called out, then looked back at Crumley and the others. Warriors, for the sake of fairness, I'll ask you one last time, do you agree with this choice? Otherwise, we can draw again. Norwegian Spinosaurus, one of the most ferocious dragon species, resembles Hungarian Dendrocranium, only lacking the final spike on its tail. Because of this, Bagman felt his question was pointless. After all, he wasn't drawing a Welsh green dragon. But regardless, he still performed his duty as a fair referee. But it was clear that the other 3 champions had also done their homework. Upon seeing the Norwegian Ridgeback, no one objected. All right. Good luck, Mr. Swinburne. Seeing no one object, Bagman stopped trying and, picking up another bag, gestured for the other 3 to continue drawing. Ino also watched from the sidelines. As if fate had twisted its course, Harry had once again drawn the Hungarian tree-crest dragon, and was the second to go. Faced with this outcome, even the shrewd Bagman showed a hint of sympathy. I must be leaving now, fulfilling my duties as a referee. You will listen carefully to my orders and proceed in order. With that, Bagman opened the tent and walked out. A few minutes later, Bagman's voice echoed from the tent, and now, let us welcome the first champion, the champion of Hogwarts, Mr. Ino Swinburne. Amidst cheers and applause, Ino slowly emerged from the tent. At the same moment, everyone in the stands focused their attention on him. Ino waved back with a smile at the applause and cheers. He also noticed the Norwegian Spinosaurus, temporarily controlled by its dragon trainer, and a giant hourglass suspended in midair. Warriors, prepare. Bagman's voice rang out again. Begin. The dragon was untied, and the hourglass in the sky began to slowly tick. Winter is coming. Ino gently raised his wand. As his voice sank, countless snowflakes suddenly drifted from the sky, and a cold mist began to spread along the ground. The ice magic inherited from the White Witch was once again on full display before everyone. In a flash, the entire venue was transformed into a world of ice and snow. The ice and snow even covered Hogwarts and the Forbidden Forest in the distance, a vast expanse of white everywhere. At the same time, perhaps sensing a threat, the Norwegian Spinosaurus suddenly attacked. Although its flight height was restricted by a long chain, being restricted did not mean it could not fly. 30 feet in the air, blazing dragon fire erupted. Facing the fire dragon's signature attack, Ino gently raised his wand again, without a single spell or unnecessary movement. However, the snowflakes from the sky, like a symphony orchestra under the command of a conductor, suddenly transformed from their earlier elegance into a frenzy. If just a simple snowfall, now it was a true blizzard. Countless snowflakes, mixed with a chilling wind, converged and rushed towards Dragon Flame. It was a battle between ice and fire. From the sky, the snow fell heavier and heavier. Although the scorching heat of the flames easily melted the ice and snow, it was ultimately defeated by the constant onslaught of snowflakes. This scene brought cheers from the stands. Ino, without even glancing at the fire dragon beside him, smiled and waved at the stands. The gesture seemed deliberate, but he had no choice. After all, only a few minutes had passed, and he had to give the dragon some time to rest, otherwise it would scare it and the visual effect would be lost. There's not enough time. Zia Odie still has a lot to write, and the anaconda hasn't appeared yet, but since we agreed on 9 o'clock, this is all we can do for now. We'll continue tomorrow, hoo. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 331: The World of Ice and Snow. Dragons, rated a 5x top-tier magical creature by the Ministry of Magic, are inherently creatures that ordinary adult wizards cannot handle alone. Their thick, tough hides protect them from most magical damage, while their robust physiques, razor-sharp claws, and scorching flames have become a nightmare for many wizards. And yet, just a few minutes ago, someone had easily dealt with a dragon's attack in front of the entire Hogwarts faculty and students, as well as those from Boxburtons and Durmstrang. Snow fell, the sky awash in countless white feathers, draping the world in a blanket of silver. Amidst this pure and tranquil scene, Ino strolled slowly, her leisurely demeanor as if admiring the beautiful snowy scene. Her well-cut, plain robes, trimmed with Slytherin green, added a touch of vibrant color to the otherwise pristine white. As he moved, his ordinary robes took on a flowing elegance, like a modest evening gown. In the surrounding stands, most of the Slytherin boys silently lowered their binoculars and glanced down at their own robes. Confirming they were the same style, their expressions shifted. On the field, Ino suddenly noticed that after blocking a burst of dragonfire, the Norwegian Spinosaurus on the other side had become cautious. This made him purse his lips. He had been extremely cautious, not even retaliating, yet the result remained the same. The dragon had become the victim, cowering in a defensive stance. Seeing this, Ino shook his head helplessly, a hint of disappointment creeping into his pure amber eyes. Though a subtle gesture, it couldn't stop everyone in the stands from holding a telescope. Amidst the vast world of ice and snow, the boy stood alone, his delicate features tinged with disappointment. This scene left all the girls feeling a pang of heartache. Regardless of school or age, they instantly reached a unanimous consensus: it was the dragon's fault. Even those with discerning eyes could see that the dragon was simply afraid. But no matter what, whether it was right or wrong, they had already determined it was the dragon's fault. Damn the dragon. Can't it just listen? In the stands, many girls murmured subconsciously. Down below, on the field. Although Ino couldn't hear the voices from the stands, he understood the dragon's thoughts. It was an extreme caution. But once he confirmed that the dragon was merely cautious, not fearful, he suddenly relaxed. Strolling leisurely, he reached within 30 feet of the dragon and, under its watchful gaze, slowly sat back. At the same moment, a high-backed chair with armrests suddenly rose from the snow-covered ground. Composed of pale blue frost, it had a shimmering, crystal-clear quality. Sitting in the chair, Ino rested his chin on one hand, staring defenselessly at the dragon. Snowflakes drifted from the sky, swirling around him like icy elves, dancing freely and unrestrainedly. In the stands. The moment Ino sat down, Colin suddenly felt a surge of worry. If the warriors behind him continued to perform like this, he vaguely felt that his film might be insufficient. However, this worry was short-lived, as the cinescope in his hand gave him renewed confidence. At worst, I'll just abandon the Daily Prophet. For the first time, Colin had the thought that the Daily Prophet would become obsolete. It seemed that newspapers were destined to be obsolete by images, whether for muggles or wizards. On the field, Ino felt helpless. He had abandoned all defenses as much as possible, even making such a provocative gesture. But the Norwegian Spinosaurus remained motionless. With such caution and stability alone, even Mad-Eye Moody would be outshined. The magical hourglass in the air continued to decrease, time quietly passed, and the snow on the same field grew thicker and thicker. Although the situation was a bit dull at the moment, none of the 5 judges, whether in the stands or in the main hall, found it dull. Dumbledore, in particular, even used the levitation spell to control a number of snowflakes, causing them to converge on the table. He quietly built a 5-inch snowman and played with it alone. Offstage, seeing the dragon's steady progress, Ino didn't know what to do. He couldn't resort to drastic measures, as that would be too boring. But to achieve the desired visual effect, after a moment's deliberation, Ino raised his hand and gently snapped his fingers. Suddenly, a miniature ice castle rose from the vast field. Roughly 20 feet high, the castle, in both height and floor space, was the same size as the pro-Norwegian Spinosaurus. It's Hogwarts. In the stands, many young wizards peered through their telescopes, clearly catching sight of the castle's shape. Towers, a keep, outer walls, a covered bridge, a greenhouse, and everything in between. As everyone watched, the main gate of the castle's main building slowly opened, and out stepped a stream of tiny wizards, about 5 inches tall, charging towards the dragon. They formed groups of 3 or 5, or rode on broomsticks, charging towards it. Once within striking distance, they drew their wands, no longer than toothpicks, and launched a ferocious attack. Pea-sized snowballs pelted the dragon's scales, causing no damage at all, but the spectacle was truly spectacular. It was like something out of Gulliver's Travels. Dozens, hundreds of tiny figures surrounded a massive beast and launched an attack. In the guest of honor's seat, Dumbledore surveyed the vivid figures, then his freshly crafted snowman. After a moment's reflection, he discreetly pushed it aside. Beside him, Madame Maxime, staring at the suddenly shoddy snowman, twitched her lips, then turned her head away in silence. But as she turned, she also naturally tapped the table. The snowman moved again, this time aiming for Karkaroff. It should have been a tense and intense Triwizard tournament, but at some point, the atmosphere shifted, a cheerful air gradually taking hold. Inside the arena, the Norwegian Spinosaurus was either an anomaly or a master of wisdom. No matter how hard it was attacked, it remained planted with unwavering composure, as if determined to remain that way forever. However, movement and stillness are always mutually exclusive. While the fire dragon chose to remain silent, Ino was busy. Not only were various ice and snow puppets frequently appearing, but even the anaconda on his wrist transformed into a foot-long snake to join in the fun. Of course, the former protagonists of the film, the clumsy Tom and the clever Jerry, were also present. The moment these two appeared, the entire stands erupted in laughter. From the initial thrills and excitement to the current laughter and joy, only a quarter of an hour had passed. After all, the magical hourglass drawn in the air was only halfway through. Chapter 332 ending with the second warrior. Time seemed to slip by in the midst of laughter. With half the hourglass remaining, the field had become a whimsical spectacle. Blooming ice flowers covered the entire field, a 2-foot-tall whomping willow, swarms of fairies, adorable cattails, and even the puppet wizard who had emerged from the castle earlier, now riding a broomstick and engaging in a miniature Quidditch game in the air. A fairy tale seemed to have come true. This provided the entertainment-starved wizards with a visual feast. Ling. As the hourglass finally ran out, a resounding bell echoed in the sky. First match, over. Bagman's voice echoed again, and applause erupted from the stands. The applause was less intense than at the beginning, rather subdued. Yet, even the subdued applause felt sincere and genuine. Similarly, many people spontaneously stood up, as if to show respect for the warrior's exit. As Bagman finished speaking, Ino slowly rose from his high-backed chair, turned around, and waved once more to the audience in the stands. But the moment he turned, the dragon, previously acting cowardly, suddenly erupted, its 60-foot-long body hurling itself forward. The suddenness of the incident caught not only the wizards in the stands, but also the professors in the guest seats and even the dragon trainers outside the arena off guard. Watch out! On your side. Bagman, the host and referee, warned immediately. But his words were cut short mid-sentence, as if someone had grabbed his throat. On the field, an anaconda, even longer than the dragon itself, a full 70 feet, clung to the surging Norwegian ridgeback. The anaconda's jaws opened in a silent threat. Unlike ordinary snakes, it possessed 4 to 6 rows of teeth, all of which were hooked. Faced with a maw that could easily swallow an adult and its dense array of razor-sharp teeth, the Norwegian Spinosaurus once again bowed its head in resignation. And faced with this unexpected turn of events, Ino never looked back. Though he appeared casual, he had long been wary of this unusual-looking fire dragon. Fortunately, the dragon didn't disappoint him, finally rising to prominence. This not only brought the match to a successful conclusion, but also gave the anaconda a chance to appear. His previous transformation had finally paid off. In the field, Ino smiled and waved his wand, and the snowflakes gradually ceased falling. Behind him, 2 behemoths appeared. The anacondas, their maws wide open, now held the fire dragons in their grasp. In the stands, Colin felt an unprecedented rush. One hand held the videoscope steady, the lens inside not shaking at all. With the other, he kept focusing and snapping photos. All in all, there was a strange, yet coordinated, flurry of activity. The match concluded, and the dragon trainers quickly entered the arena, taking away the nearly autistic Norwegian Spinosaurus. The ice and snow on the field were also cleared. After all, the Triwizard tournament was supposed to be absolutely fair and impartial. After a few minutes, Bagman rose from the guest of honor's seat and read aloud, "The 5 judges' scores have been announced. The champion representing Hogwarts, Mr. Ino Swinburne, has a final score, a perfect 50. Applause and cheers rang out again, this time even more enthusiastic than before. Amidst the applause, Ino quietly exited the arena, and Bagman announced the next champion. Outside the tent, Ino passed Harry. "Keep going. You two are a symbol of Hogwarts courage." Seeing the slightly nervous Harry, he immediately offered words of encouragement. "Thank you." Harry nodded slightly and strode toward the center of the arena. The Hungarian Dendroctopsisaurus, nearly 65 feet long, with spikes protruding from its spine, made it resemble a Norwegian Spinosaurus. But the difference was that the Hungarian tree-crested dragon's tail, thick and end-marked with sharp bone spurs, looked like a custom-made meteor hammer. Though its movement was currently restricted, its massive tail continuously pounded the ground, making a resounding bang-bang sound. Harry's face darkened with each lash of the dragon's tail. Moody had taught him some magic, but seeing the massive beast before him, Harry couldn't help but wonder if those spells were merely scratching the dragon's itch. Meanwhile, in the guest of honor, upon seeing Harry's expression, both Madame Maxime and Karkaroff relaxed. They were immediately and sincerely grateful to the cheater, otherwise, there wouldn't have been an extra champion, let alone an even score. In contrast to the relaxed demeanor of the two headmasters and the guest of honor, Professor McGonagall, outside, nervously drew her wand, ready to rescue at any moment. This wasn't because she doubted the dragon trainer's expertise, she simply didn't trust Harry. A boy barely 15, distracted in class, copying his homework, was supposed to face a ferocious Hungarian tree-crest? This wasn't a competition, but more like a murder. Time slipped by. Seeing Harry enter the ring, Bagman spoke again. "Warriors, ready. Go." With that, the dragon trainer untied the dragon's restraints, and the magical hourglass in the sky began to flow. Everything seemed to have come full circle, the story beginning anew. However, with Ino's first match, the young wizards in the stands were eagerly anticipating Harry's performance. Although Harry's performance had been mediocre since he entered school, he had been taught by many at Hogwarts that saviors were treated differently. How long this treatment would last was unknown, but one thing was certain, it wasn't just yet. Suddenly freed from its restraints, the Hungarian tree crest raised its head and roared. At the same time, Harry waved his wand, mist, armor. These two spells not only relieved Professor McGonagall, but also Snape on the other side of the stands. Facing an invincible force, hiding and defending are the wisest options. The ethereal mist, as a disruptive auxiliary magic, can often produce unexpected results, especially in such a confined space. As Harry's voice fell, wisps of gray mist, like smoke, quietly emerged. They seemed to have life, silently wriggling, converging, and expanding, spreading wantonly like a giant beast imbued with the magic. In the tent, Harry had considered many options, but after facing the dragon head-on, he chose Mad-Eye Moody's advice, using magic to disrupt the dragon's vision while using nimble dodging to stall for time. The initial thought of a head-on confrontation had long been forgotten at this moment. "There's another one, around 9 o'clock. Sorry everyone. Time is really running out lately." Chapter 333, Shocking Changes, Life Calling Curse. The Goblet of Fire, used as the playing field, was a converted Quidditch pitch. As a standard Quidditch pitch, its land area wasn't particularly large, merely an oval square 800 feet long and 500 feet wide. Surrounding this square were numerous towering stands, which made it easy for the fog to gather. Just over 10 seconds had passed since the spell was cast. A gray fog had obscured a radius of several dozen meters, centered around Harry. As if lacking momentum, the fog's initial expansion had gradually slowed. Even with this weakening, the area it currently covered was sufficient for Harry to conceal himself. In the field, unlike the previous dragon's cautious approach, the Hungarian tree-crest dragon, after a roar, also noticed something unusual. Perhaps due to the difference in species, the dragon Harry faced didn't resort to probing attacks with dragon fire. Instead, it chose a more primitive method of combat, flapping its wings and swooping directly towards the area shrouded in fog. Amidst the smoke, Harry dove left and right, tumbling and leaping, exemplifying the aura dodging techniques Moody had taught him to the utmost. Even amidst the raging dragonfire, he managed to calmly find his position and, with a series of rolls, narrowly evade it. However, Harry overlooked a crucial factor: this was an open match. The smoke obscured the dragon's vision, but it also caused a sense of unease among the young wizards in the stands. The previous match had been a visual feast, but this one was a blur. The stark contrast elicited complaints from many. It was like a Muggle movie theater. After paying for tickets, all you see is a cloud of black smoke, a disconcerting experience. The young wizards' expressions were grim, as were Madame Maxime and Karkaroff. At Harry's current pace, he was sure to last more than half an hour. By the time the timer expired, they would have to score high. Meanwhile, while Harry was engaged in a fierce battle, Ino had already returned to the warrior's tent. After nodding to Cromanfleur, he returned to his previous bench. He was quite satisfied with the match, especially the Anaconda's final appearance. There was a lot of visual flair, a lot of gimmickry, and all sorts of novel ice and snow sculptures. The Goblet of Fire Special Edition videoscope was probably going to be a big hit. His only curiosity now was whether Marcus would sell them separately or all at once after the 3 matches. Regardless, this one was a success. Once this busy period is over, I'll put them to work. Sitting on the bench, Ino thought of the alchemical puppets in the valley. Playing around all day in the valley wasn't the right thing to do. A balance of work and rest was more sensible. Inside the tent, Ino's thoughts drifted. Outside, Harry was surrounded by danger. The hourglass in the sky slowly ticked away, and with it, his strength vanished. The continuous, intense dodging left him feeling a sense of exhaustion, and even more irritating was the noise from the surrounding stands. The voices weren't quite clear, but the occasional coward rang out clearly. Although he longed to find the person who'd called him a coward and have him come down to experience the dragon's presence for himself, Harry was truly overwhelmed by the dragon's attacks. The magical mist had thinned considerably with a blast of dragon fire. 5 minutes later. With a Hungarian tree-crest dragon's final burst of dragon fire, the mist quietly dissipated. Without the cloud's obstruction, everyone in the stands immediately grabbed their binoculars. However, unlike what they'd expected, Harry didn't appear to be strolling leisurely. Instead, he looked utterly awful. His hair was disheveled, his face stained with dirt, and even his uniform robes had a corner singed black. He looked downright ridiculous. PFFT. Ha ha ha. It was unclear who burst out laughing first, but it was like a signal, setting off a chain reaction throughout the stands. Amidst a chorus of laughter, Harry lowered his head and silently gazed at his wand. At that moment, he felt like a clown. He'd trained so hard, practiced magic so diligently, and even battled a dragon through thick and thin, only to be met with laughter. Everything he'd sacrificed to prove himself, to earn the title of Hogwarts Knight, now seemed like a joke. Harry froze in his tracks, stunned by the change in his mindset. But the Hungarian tree-crest dragon showed no mercy. After catching sight of the figure who had teased it, it flapped its wings and pounced at the dragon at breakneck speed. Seeing Harry didn't react, Snape and Professor McGonagall raised their wands simultaneously. Experienced dragon trainers also entered the arena, along with Fawkes the Phoenix, who appeared beside Harry. As the person involved, the laughter and exhaustion combined to create a wave of rage in Harry, which quickly spread. The intensity of whose rage nearly made him forget where he was, who he was. The dragon's appearance gave Harry an instant outlet for his rage. If it weren't for that Hungarian tree-crest dragon, he wouldn't be in such a state of disgrace, nor would he be the target of everyone's ridicule. It was all because of that damn dragon. Avada, eat the big melon. A flash of green light flashed, and the entire world seemed to pause. The moment the magic struck, the dragon collapsed to the ground, and the laughter around him abruptly stopped. No one could have imagined this. The 3 unforgivable curses were unleashed before everyone's eyes, even killing a dragon on the spot. In the stands, Draco's face was pale, and his mouth trembled. Unlike the others who were frightened, he was truly terrified. Scarhead had actually killed a dragon with a killing curse. Amidst his fear, he was also thankful that he had listened to Ino and chosen to stay away from Scarhead after the start of the semester. Silence fell in the stands, but the guest seats were abuzz with excitement. Barty Crouch Sr., former head of the Department of Law Enforcement and current head of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, immediately stood up. Harry Potter must be removed for openly using the unforgivable curse in violation of English Ministry of Magic regulations. The Triwizard Tournament is suspended. Old Barty. This is suspicious. He's still a student. Even if he knows the killing curse, he can't kill a dragon. Bagman immediately intervened. He didn't object to Harry Potter being taken away, but he couldn't stop the Triwizard Tournament. This was worse than killing him. Whatever. If you want, go ahead. But I'm taking the student away now. Ministry laws cannot be trampled upon. Barty glanced at his former colleague. He didn't care what they thought, but this matter needed to be resolved. All right, the law cannot be trampled upon. But we have to wait until the tournament is over, Bagman argued. After all, how could the tournament be played without a referee? Barty Sr. ignored Bagman and turned to the silent Dumbledore, waiting for the headmaster's response. After all, no one in England can ignore Dumbledore's opinion. I've been a little late with some trivial matters lately, so I'm sorry. Sorry. Chapter 334, Comfort and Delay. The Killing Curse, one of the 3 unforgivable curses, is far more renowned than the Imperious and Cruciatus curses. Its signature green beam, in particular, instills death and terror in those who behold it. Granted, many forms of magic can also cause death, even household magic. But no other form of magic can replicate the sensory effects of the Killing Curse. At the main table, Dumbledore stood frozen, oblivious to Barty Crouch's question, his gaze fixed on Harry's figure. Only after seeing Snape and Professor McGonagall enter the arena did his expression relax slightly. Meanwhile, Madame Maxime and Karkaroff wisely remained silent. This was another family matter, not their place to comment. After a long pause, Dumbledore spoke slowly. The Goblet of Fire's decision is irreversible. You should be well aware of that, Bartemius. Yes, I am. Barty Crouch Sr. took over, feeling a sense of pressure from Dumbledore's silence. I understand that, but I understand even more clearly that the public demands an explanation. Although it was only a dragon, far too many people saw it. Old Barty glanced around. He had no idea how many people were in the stands, but the Daily Prophet would likely release all the information tomorrow, or even this afternoon. If the Ministry of Magic didn't come up with a solution, the prohibition against the unforgivable curses would be as useless as a piece of paper, completely unenforceable. Let's wait until the first match is over. Harry and I will go to the Ministry, and the matter will be decided by the Wizengamot. Dumbledore's tone was gentle, yet it conveyed a sense of certainty. Okay. It's settled then, old Barty nodded slightly. Whether it was a delay or some other reason, since Dumbledore had spoken, he decided to respect it. Old Barty immediately returned to his seat and silently continued to referee. At the same time, after watching Harry being led away by 2 professors, Dumbledore spoke again, this time using a magnifying spell. A minor incident has occurred. A champion, faced with a death threat, resorted to drastic measures. Dumbledore's voice filled the entire arena, profoundly soothing the young wizards. We will handle these matters appropriately, but the competition must continue. I wish the beautiful Miss Delacour and the valiant Mr. Krum even greater success. Words, in the wizarding world, truly hold magical power, whether curses or prophecies. But there are those, like Dumbledore, whose even the most ordinary words seem to possess a magical power. Many of the young wizards in the stands pictured Fleur, and many others recalled Krum's heroic presence at the Quidditch World Cup. The chaos and fear were easily dispelled by a few words. Then, Bagman, a near-professional host, livened up the atmosphere. Now, we invite the 3rd champion. Inside the tent, Fleur nervously stood up at Bagman's voice. Although she had no idea what was happening outside, Dumbledore's final explanation rang clear into the tent. Accidents, extremes, even death threats. Krum was fine. Quidditch was a dangerous profession, and injury or even death was common. Fleur, however, couldn't handle it calmly. She was simply a brilliant and beautiful woman, and she had never experienced such things. But regardless, the situation was pressing. After a brief moment of composure, Fleur opened the tent and walked out alone. Elsewhere, Ino also stood up, her gaze turning to Krum. I'll go see what's going on. Go for it. After a brief greeting, Ino headed towards the small door they'd come from. Although Dumbledore's words had been light, he had a feeling that things were more complicated than they seemed. The story had been completely altered. Besides, no one knew whether the current Voldemort was the paranoid Voldemort of his later years, or the spirit that had possessed Quirrell for a year. Actually, Voldemort's later years were fine. After all, in any story, the fear isn't a villain's madness, the fear is a villain's brains. If it were a first-year soul. Ino couldn't help but recall their experience in the corridor. Back then, While Voldemort concealed a ruthless cruelty, he still possessed reason, and his conversations were logical and logical. Things seemed a bit confusing, and as for the Triwizard Tournament, he didn't really care anymore. Honestly, it was just the spice of life. The so-called Goblet of Fire's Covenant, with its bronze lamp that could illuminate secrets, wouldn't be difficult to crack with some effort. While pondering this, Ino had already left the Quidditch pitch and headed for the hospital wing on the second floor of the castle. Hogwarts, hospital wing. Harry lay dazed on the hospital bed, not quite understanding what had just happened. He vaguely felt a surge of anger, and that anger was directed at the Hungarian tree-crested dragon. As for what happened next, Harry looked around. Professor McGonagall looked worried and sad, while Snape stood expressionless in the corner. Nothing serious. Or rather, I haven't found anything obvious. But he needs to rest for now. This state is a sign of overexertion. I'll get him some nourishing potions. Madame Pomfrey concluded this after a thorough examination. Thank God. Professor McGonagall's expression softened, and she glanced at the bedside. Harry, you heard it too. Just rest and don't worry about anything. I'll take care of everything. After confirming that Harry was fine, Professor McGonagall turned and instructed Snape in the corner. Then you stay here and keep an eye on him. I have to fulfill my duties as deputy headmaster and speak to the judges. With that, Professor McGonagall walked out the door with great resolution. With Professor McGonagall's departure, Harry and Snape were left alone in the vast hospital wing. The two stared at each other, and the atmosphere was awkward for a moment. Harry simply didn't know what to say, and Snape was in no mood to speak either. His mind was preoccupied with the final killing curse. Clean, sharp, and fatal, without a trace of hesitation, it was also delivered with an immense confidence. It was as if no matter who was before him, they would quietly submit to the slaughter, waiting to be killed by the killing curse. And he had only seen this style in one person. Lying in the hospital bed, Harry had no idea what Snape was thinking. After a brief moment of recovery, he became worried about his own results, and what the judges would ultimately score. Time slipped quietly in this quiet atmosphere. A quarter of an hour after Professor McGonagall left, Ino also arrived at the hospital wing. Knock knock. He stood at the door, took a look inside, and after confirming that everything was correct, he knocked gently twice on the door, then pushed it open and entered the room. Chapter 335, Ino's backup plan, the worst plan. Entering the ward, Ino ignored Harry and immediately went to Snape. It was nothing more than the headmaster's presence, which seemed a bit unstable. Snape stood alone in a corner, seemingly quiet, but his eyes, no longer the usual emptiness and indifference, were now filled with rich emotion. Professor, are you okay? The sudden voice in the quiet room jolted Snape back to his senses, but he didn't respond immediately, instead closing his eyes for a long moment. I'm fine. I forgot to congratulate you on getting a perfect score, Snape said calmly. Hell, it's just a game, don't worry about it. Ino chuckled, glanced at Harry subtly, nodded slightly, and then looked back at Snape. Some things don't need to be taken seriously, and some things don't need to be taken too seriously. Magic works miracles, and there's always a solution. Ino thought back to all the kindness Snape had shown him since he first started school, whether it was the extra potions lessons or the Half-Blood Prince's notes, which always helped him so much. Especially the magic spell Invisible Sharpness in the notes. Even now, it still worked remarkably well. Some favors must be repaid. After a moment's reflection, Ino said cautiously, Professor, trust me. Nothing is unsolvable. Instantly, he came up with the worst-case scenario, yet also the most perfect one. Kill Harry outright, then resurrect him with the ice flower. While his resurrection would subject him to sanctuary, it would also be easier to subject him to Voldemort, and he wouldn't even have to worry about being assimilated by a remnant soul. Honestly, Ino knew full well that this story was called Harry Potter, and that Harry was the protagonist. But in reality, the focus had never been Harry. What could be expected from a 10-year-old? He wasn't born with innate wisdom. Even at the end of the story, Harry had only just turned 17. Yet, in this story, everyone and everything revolved around this half-grown child. Dumbledore wanted to completely eliminate Voldemort, but he also wanted to protect Harry, which made him hesitant. Voldemort's behavior was even more bizarre. After his resurrection, he seemed cursed, even under the Imperious Curse, and he kept targeting Harry. He had the opportunity to attack him head-on, but he chose to engage in a gentlemanly one-on-one duel. As for Snape, his actions were even more pure, completely willing to obey whoever could save Harry. Because everything revolved around Harry, Ino had come up with a last resort. The rope was tied in a knot, so he could just cut it with scissors. By eliminating Harry beforehand, he had resolved all the problems at their source. In the quiet hospital room, Snape relaxed slightly after hearing Ino's words about magic working miracles and that there was no problem that couldn't be solved. It wasn't that the words had any magical power, but rather that they reminded him of the wolfsbane potion. The werewolf problem, which had plagued countless wizards, had finally been solved by the potion. Thinking of this, Snape's demeanor calmed down. Yes, you're right. There's nothing unsolvable. Snape repeated them again, murmured, as if in reply, but also as if speaking to himself. Meanwhile, Ino stopped talking after seeing this. At this point, he had no idea where the story of the Goblet of Fire was headed. He could only take it one step at a time. Horizontal ellipsis. And just then, the door to the ward was pushed open again. Well, that's how you visit a patient. After all, Harry needs rest, not chat. Madame Pomfrey entered with a potion. Seeing Ino and Snape standing quietly by, she couldn't help but feel a surge of affection. Take your medicine, child. I added a tranquilizer. Take it and have a good sleep. Don't think about anything else. You're just recovering now. Lying in bed, Harry glanced at the potion Madame Pomfrey handed him. The glass bottle contained a murky, unidentified liquid. In the past, such a potion would have made him nauseated, but now he took it naturally, downing it without a second thought. Instantly, a bitter and sour taste washed over him, but somehow, he didn't find the taste too offensive. Instead, he felt a certain fondness for it. Horizontal ellipsis. A few minutes later. Under the effects of the potion, even breathing could be heard from the bed. Looking at the sleeping Harry, Ino felt a wave of emotion. He seemed the titular protagonist, and everyone seemed to be out for his own good. But in reality, whether it was fame or hardship, Harry had always passively accepted and borne it. It had been like this since birth. If I didn't have that scar, I wouldn't have to be so famous. Ino sighed softly, then turned his gaze out the window. The whomping willow swayed gently in the winter wind. In the distance, the sounds of the Quidditch pitch could be faintly heard, even from a distance. Suddenly, as if struck by a thought, Ino turned his head to look at the scar on Harry's head again, then vanished. When he reappeared, he held an antique bronze oil lamp in his hand. In that instant, a thought struck him. Horcruxes, it seemed, could be categorized as magical items. While they were unique, they were essentially manufactured. Since they were manufactured, they were easy to deal with. After all, the oil lamp could illuminate even a time turner, so it should be no problem for it to expose Horcruxes as well. With the intention of giving it a try, Ino slowly approached the sleeping Harry, under Snape's astonished gaze. Meanwhile, the first match of the Triwizard Tournament drew to a close. After Krumm's final dodge, the magical hourglass in mid-air completely drained. After a brief deliberation, the 5 judges awarded their scores. Perhaps thanks to the professional seeker's quick reflexes, Krumm's final score was a full 7 points higher than Fleur's, reaching an excellent 45. Amidst applause and cheers, the first match concluded. Without further notice, the young wizards in the stands began to leave in an orderly manner. After all, their experiences today were truly remarkable, and they desperately needed a place to discuss their thoughts. As everyone gradually left, everything seemed to be over. However, the show in the main stage had just begun. That's enough. Now it's time for me to take Harry Potter out, said Barty Crouch Sr., standing up and reaching out to loosen his tie. As soon as Barty Sr. finished speaking, Professor McGonagall immediately stepped forward, unhesitatingly stating her position. My student needs to rest. He's injured. No one can take him away now. Barty Sr. didn't confront Professor McGonagall directly, instead looking at Dumbledore with a questioning look. He wasn't worried about Dumbledore going back on his word. After all, he'd made that promise in front of the other 2 headmasters. But now, an explanation was needed. Meanwhile, Bagman, unusually, didn't object. While he didn't head the Department of Law Enforcement, as a high-ranking official at the Ministry of Magic, there were things he couldn't ignore, especially in public. Chapter 336 Harry Under the Bronze Oil Lamp. At the guest of honor's table, after Professor McGonagall's firm stance, Madame Maxime turned and left without a second thought. The affairs of Hogwarts and the Ministry of Magic had nothing to do with her, a French headmistress. Staying would only make her look like she was out to make a fool of herself. Madame Maxime's departure also made it difficult for Karkaroff to remain alone. With the departure of the two foreign friends, Bagman breathed a sigh of relief. With only his own people present, everything could be discussed behind closed doors. He saw the whole matter as a minor matter. It was just the slaying of a dragon, not the deaths of humans. The only problem was the public use of the killing curse. However, considering the danger of the situation and Harry's fame, going to the ministry was merely a formality, one that wouldn't affect the subsequent competition. Listen, this matter itself is nothing. Old Barty, don't be so anxious. Bagman acted as a détente. As long as it didn't affect the competition, everything was negotiable. Soon, following his colleague's remarks, Old Barty also chose to compromise temporarily, shaking his head and saying, "I will stay here for the time being, waiting for Harry Potter to recover." Old Barty's idea was good, but Professor McGonagall rolled her eyes. She immediately said unhappily, "Live here? Then you need to set up a tent by yourself, and the kitchen of Hogwarts only serves the teachers and students of the castle." At the same time, in order to avoid further conflicts, Bagman took the initiative to take over the conversation. "Haha. Professor McGonagall, please rest assured about this. Old Barty has her house elves anyway, and he may not be accustomed to the food he ate in his school days." This was meant to give his colleague a way out, but it was obvious that Old Barty not only did not take it, but he was also stunned on the spot, which was uncharacteristically the case. "I have house elves." As if realizing that he had said the wrong thing, Old Barty changed the subject and continued, "Forget it, that's not the point. Let's just settle this matter. I will wait for Harry Potter to recover." When the Ministry of Magic and Hogwarts reached a consensus, Ino also noticed something unusual. In the light of the oil lamp, the scar on Harry's forehead emanated a thick plume of black smoke. This phenomenon was similar to that of Ravenclaw's diadem. The only difference was that the smoke on the diadem had a distinctly bewitching power, while Harry's was rather ordinary. The smoke seemed to be restrained by something, yet it appeared somewhat quiet. However, these two things were only relative to other Horcruxes. While he wasn't sure what it had been like before, the current situation had made Ino cautious. Harry had to thank his mother for being able to endure this long, surrounded daily by this malicious black smoke. In fact, upon discovering the black smoke was restrained, he thought of the protective magic Lily had cast with her life in the original story. Otherwise, Harry would have been succumbed long ago. But that's not the case. Ino murmured in confusion, observing the restrained black smoke. "What did you see?" Snape appeared at the bedside. He realized something was wrong the moment he saw Ino's expression. His student had never been one for light-hearted jokes or pranks. "I saw the malice Voldemort left behind, but thankfully they were bound and safe for now." Ino didn't hide it. After all, Snape already knew about this. "What about this time?" Snape didn't say, but his meaning was clear. "I don't know." Ino shook his head slightly. Thinking about it, he felt vaguely that he must have overlooked something. Otherwise, if the number of Horcruxes remained constant, such a dramatic increase wouldn't have occurred. After all, during the summer vacation, Dumbledore had collected the remaining 2 Horcruxes, seemingly out of fear of any mishaps. This served as a form of protection, preventing the Horcruxes from being accidentally destroyed and causing a chain reaction. Meanwhile, after hearing Ino's answer, Snape said nothing more, simply silently watching the sleeping Harry. Lying on the hospital bed, Harry's eyes were closed. It was a face that bore a striking resemblance to old Potter, yet Snape couldn't quite find it distasteful. 4 years, the first potions class, scenes flashed before his eyes. "Professor, I'm leaving now. I need some help thinking through something." After confirming that there were no other abnormalities, Ino slowly stood up. "Yes." Snape nodded slightly. However, just as Ino was about to leave, the same unchanging voice echoed in his ears, "If you need Felix Felicis, let me know. I have plenty stored. A lot stored." Ino's first thought was that Hermione had been deceived. The claim that there was no extra Felix Felicis was a lie. But then he thought that this might be a test from the professor. Regardless, the item belonged to Snape, and he had the right to decide what to do with it. "Not for now. I'll get it from you if I need it." After answering, Ino slowly walked out of the hospital wing. At the same time, with the end of the tournament, The castle was plunged into an extreme bustle. In the corridors, dormitories, halls, common rooms, wherever people were seen, there was always a young wizard standing alone. It was simple, one person couldn't discuss things. Even in the quiet hospital wing, two young wizards walked side by side outside the corridor. Don't worry too much. Harry's situation was an emergency, so I don't think anything serious will happen. Hermione comforted Ginny softly, explaining the concept of emergency. She knew Ginny was anxious. The moment Harry killed the dragon and was taken away by the professor, Ginny had wanted to chase him. But in the crowded stands, that thought was impossible. After holding on until the end of the game, Ginny immediately ran to the hospital wing. As a friend, Hermione wouldn't leave Ginny alone, so she followed. Thank you, Hermione. I know everything. Ginny turned around, her face etched with worry, but noticeably more relaxed. Seeing Ginny's change of heart, Hermione added something else. There was nothing she could do. Harry had seen everyone use the unforgivable curse. Meanwhile, Ino had just left the hospital wing when she spotted two Gryffindor girls approaching. I'm done coding for today. Please vote. Please vote. Chapter 337 Holding Hands, Instructions to Hermione. On the second floor of the castle, a long, quiet corridor stretched. One side led to Madame Pomfrey's office and the treatment room, while the other connected to the castle's sliding staircase. The midday sun filtered through the window lattices, casting dappled shadows. Standing at the hospital wing entrance, Ino's gaze caught sight of Hermione and Ginny walking side by side at the far end of the corridor. A ripple of emotion stirred within him. Although Harry often bore the brunt of the burden, he had his share of luck. For example, Ginny's unwavering trust and care were unwavering. From a distance, the two Gryffindor girls also spotted the people standing at the hospital wing entrance. Hermione, in particular, beamed with surprise. I know. A clear, melodious voice echoed through the corridor. Hermione's words were tinged with unexpected joy, and her long legs unconsciously quickened their pace. Are you here to see Harry too? I'm here with Ginny. She's not looking well, and I'm a little worried about her, Hermione explained softly as she approached, glancing back occasionally, as if waiting for Ginny's confirmation. She hadn't expected Ino to be here. She had originally planned to send Ginny to the hospital ward and then offer her congratulations in person. While their encounter was a pleasant surprise, there were also some things that needed to be clarified. As a friend, you're doing the right thing. She doesn't look well. I know, sensing Hermione's concern, waved her off. As they chatted, Ginny finally caught up with Hermione and arrived at the hospital ward entrance. Good morning, Mr. Swinburne. Despite her concern, Ginny still greeted politely. Just call me Ino, Ino said, turning around naturally. Although George and Fred were close, they didn't interact much. Aside from the second-year notebook incident, he hadn't even spoken to her alone. If you want to see Harry, do it now, even though he's asleep. If too many people arrive soon, I'm afraid Madame Pomfrey will have to restrict access. But don't worry, he's not seriously injured. Ino admired Ginny, such a resolute and single-minded girl truly endeared him. Perhaps his admiration was superficial, for after he finished speaking, he felt his boot kicked. Turning to see Hermione staring at the ceiling as if nothing had happened, Ginny couldn't help but laugh, gently covering her mouth. Hearing that Harry was unharmed, the worry in her eyes faded, but she had to go in anyway. Giving Hermione another encouraging look, Ginny headed for the hospital wing's main entrance. With Ginny's departure, the corridor returned to silence. A moment later, Hermione broke the silence. Is he really okay? So far, so good, Ino nodded slightly. Okay. But I haven't congratulated you yet. You deserve the perfect score, Hermione said, her head raised slightly, her face sincere. It seemed that after sharing a secret in the room of requirement, their relationship had invisibly grown closer. The most noticeable change was that Hermione no longer blushed shyly, now staring openly at him. Thank you. But it was just a game, Ino explained with a smile, not avoiding Hermione's gaze. In the quiet corridor, the two stared at each other, everything around them still. For a long moment, a soft click broke the silence, and the door to the hospital wing was pushed open again. At the sound, they both turned their heads simultaneously, his signature black robes standing out. Outside, Snape, unusually awkward, stood there, stunned, unsure whether to go in or out, seemingly torn between two options. Good afternoon. Professor Snape. Fortunately, Hermione quickly recovered and took the initiative to greet him. In fact, she was deeply grateful to Snape. If it weren't for the two-way mirrors and the bottle of Felix Felicis found in the potions classroom, she might not have noticed many things at first, but now, reflecting on them, she could see the similarities between them. And that similarity was the robed potions professor before her. To avoid embarrassing the professor, Hermione, after greeting him, unthinkingly pulled Ino with her and headed towards the other side of the corridor. Meanwhile, Ino, stunned by the sudden move, didn't even say a word to Snape before being pulled away by Hermione. Snape stood silently in the corridor, watching the two of them leave. As they moved forward, even after leaving the hospital wing, Hermione seemed to have no intention of letting go, continuing to walk ahead. Noticing this, Ino, without saying anything, simply exerted a slight pressure with her palm, transforming the passive hand-holding into an active side-by-side walk. It was a natural and smooth transition. Perhaps this transformation had been a natural progression from the moment she received the Hermione Felixir. Perhaps any relationship begins with a debt. Feeling the warmth in her palm, Hermione's lips curled up into a smile. Down the long corridor, the two walked side by side, their pace slow but always in sync. After a moment, Ino suddenly spoke. For the time being, if possible, stay away from Harry. Because of the unforgivable curse. Hermione looked up in surprise. After a moment's hesitation, she asked, how could a single use of dark magic cause such severe effects? No. There's something else going on. Ino shook his head slightly, momentarily struggling with a decision. Ultimately, he decided to tell Hermione everything, lest she be unaware of the seriousness of the situation. Hermione, there's something you might need to know, but it's best kept to yourself. Pausing, Ino said cautiously, Harry's become a little different, but it's not his fault. You could think of it as a dark curse. In just a few minutes, with the exception of mentioning Voldemort and the Horcruxes, he explained the severity of the situation to Hermione, including Harry's uncertainty. Oh my God. Hermione's eyes widened in disbelief. She'd assumed it was just an emergency, but she hadn't expected it to involve so much. Oh no. Ginny's still in there. Hermione whipped her head around, then glanced down the corridor. She remembered that Professor Snape had left the ward before leaving, meaning Ginny and Harry were now alone. It's not that serious, Ino said, grabbing Hermione and explaining. Besides, Harry drank Madame Pomfrey's potion, so he won't wake up for a while. Doesn't Professor Dumbledore know about this? Hasn't he come up with a solution? Hermione paused, her tone thick with uncertainty. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 338, Locking the Target with a Crown. Hearing Dumbledore's sudden mention, Ino was momentarily at a loss for words. Honestly, given the current situation, he had no idea what Dumbledore was thinking. But one thing seemed certain, the old headmaster had gone too far. He had openly cast the unforgivable curse in front of the entire Hogwarts faculty and students, as well as foreign guests like Oxburtons and Durmstrang. This was a grave matter for England, for Hogwarts, and even for Harry himself. Rumors can be devastating. They can elevate a person to a pedestal, or cast them into the abyss. In response to Hermione's question, after a moment's deliberation, he decided to offer Hermione some reassurance, immediately instructing her, Professor Dumbledore is aware of this situation and likely has a solution. It's beyond our control, but you should always carry the feather of Cribbith with you, and don't hesitate to do so when needed. Hearing this, Hermione relaxed a little. But when she heard about Cribb's feather, she paused for a moment before nodding and saying, yes, I usually carry it with me. Hermione's brief pause didn't escape Ino's notice. Phoenix feathers are just consumables, not precious. Midway through their conversation, they both paused to chat because a crowd had suddenly appeared at the end of the corridor. Ron, Neville, Seamus, Colin, George, Fred, a huge crowd, seemingly all here to visit Harry. Faced with so many familiar faces, Hermione instinctively wanted to loosen her hand, but at that moment, she found it tightened. The corridor on the second floor of the castle. Though long and narrow, it lacked any obstruction. This made it easy for the Gryffindors to spot what was happening nearby. Wow. George was the first to notice something unusual, exclaiming a slightly exaggerated exclamation, then following suit and taking Fred's hand. The twins seemed to truly be in tune with each other. Fred immediately agreed to George's gesture. The two walked in front, simultaneously raising their linked hands and swinging them back and forth as if to announce something. Hermione, on the other hand, had been unfazed from the initial conversation to the hand-holding, but shyly lowered her head in the face of the twins' exaggerated performance. Hello. Unlike Hermione's shyness, Ino greeted everyone naturally. It wasn't something to be ashamed of. Ginny's in there too, but I suggest you go in groups, or Madame Pomfrey will kick you out. Ino finished speaking, and Fred immediately took over. Then let little Ronnie and his classmates go in first. I just remembered something. Before Fred could finish, George raised his right hand and waved it in the air. You guys might need a specially made straw ring. As the twins spoke, Colin stood aside in silence. He neither followed Ron and the others into the ward, nor approached Ino to chat like Fred and George did. At the edge of the corridor, Colin first glanced at the camera on his chest, then quietly glanced at Ino and Hermione's clasped hands. After a while, taking advantage of the moment when George and Fred finished chatting, he mustered up the courage to speak. Sorry to bother you. Mr. Swinburne, can I take a picture of you? Colin stated his request. In fact, with his experience with the Daily Prophet, he had gradually come to understand some basic journalistic principles. Except for certain circumstances, other photographs required the consent of the person involved, as opposed to the usual practice of snapping away indiscriminately in the castle. Meanwhile, after a moment's reflection at the sudden request for a photo, Ino nodded cheerfully, of course. The castle's most professional reporter. The little joke brought them closer. Ino stood there, watching Colin fiddle with the camera. He remained optimistic about this unsung hero. At the end of the story, many people had sacrificed their lives. Fred, moody, Sirius Black. But few remember that the list of casualties also included a young Muggle wizard, Colin Creevey, who had just turned 15. Perhaps the only one who truly remembered Colin was his brother, Dennis Creevey, a year his junior. As the camera shutter clicked, a cheerful smile spread across Colin's face. Thank you for your generosity. But I might send some of these photos to the Daily Prophet. Colin's tone hesitated slightly, as if seeking permission. As you wish. There's nothing shameful about this. Ino said, glancing at Hermione, a question and a request for her opinion. Under such a gaze, Hermione nodded modestly, her expression and gestures looking remarkably ladylike. But the smile at the corner of her mouth seemed irresistible. Time slipped by silently. After Colin finished taking photos, Ino chatted briefly with George and Fred before leaving the second-floor corridor with Hermione. Like Cedric and Cho, they parted at the turn of the stairs. After all, their respective house common rooms were on the 8th floor, one on the ground floor, the other underground. Slytherin dormitory. The moment the door closed, Ino vanished from the spot. Returning to Sanctuary Valley, he immediately sought out the Ravenclaw diadem. Donning the elegant and regal diadem, a familiar coolness washed over him. It felt like a refreshing stream on a scorching summer day, cleansing all the restlessness within, bringing a sense of calm and rationality. In this state, scenes from the past began to resurface in his mind. Since the summer vacation of his 3rd year, he had meticulously scanned every frame, every second, from the perspective of an outsider. Of course, it wasn't just past experiences, but also scenes from the original story deep within his memory. In this utterly blissful state, he never noticed a passage of time. After an unknown amount of time, Ino suddenly removed the tiara and let out a long, weary sigh. His mind finally settled on the scene of the goblet of fire being lit at the banquet, and Barty Crouch SR's pale, frail, and stumbling figure. Of course, this wasn't to say that Barty had been replaced. Rather, with the help of the tiara, he recalled a minor character from the original story, a character who appeared only briefly but was crucially important, Barty Crouch Jr. Barty Crouch Jr. was a unique entity, almost detached from the story itself. Unlike others like Sirius or Lupin, who changed with a Hogwarts story, Barty Crouch Jr. took advantage of the Ministry's busy preparations for the Quidditch World Cup. While Barty was distracted, he, with the help of Winky the house elf, broke free from the Imperious curse and fled. This also demonstrated that no matter how the story of Hogwarts shifted, Barty Crouch Jr. would remain largely unaffected. When the time came, Those who needed to escape would eventually escape. Chapter 339, Bloody Letter, Rumors of the Second Dark Lord. In the Sanctuary Valley, Ino leaned against an oak tree, diadem in hand. His recent reflections had made many previously unclear things clear. It seemed that, ever since Harry's dream during the summer vacation, Bartlett Jr. must have been at Voldemort's side. Otherwise, with Voldemort's abilities, he wouldn't have been able to do anything, let alone kill a Muggle. And then there were the events that followed, like the night of the World Cup final, or the appearances of Dumbledore and Newt, or Pettigrew's death, or even other reasons. In short, Bartlett Jr. didn't cause the commotion of the original story. And then, coupled with the confirmation of Mad-Eye Moody's authenticity at the start of school, all these factors suddenly made him realize that if it weren't for Ravenclaw's diadem, he would have truly overlooked Bartlett Jr. A dog that bites never barks. Ino marveled. Unlike the bratty Bella, Bartlett Jr. was a true Newt recipient. Not only was he intelligent, but his skills were also remarkable. Mad-Eye Moody is a prime example. As a battle-hardened retired Auror, he's not someone anyone could easily defeat alone. Unlike the tranquility of Sanctuary Valley, the castle hospital wing was overflowing. Dumbledore, Professor McGonagall, Bagman, Barty Crouch Sr., Snape, and the others had all gathered. Albus. Do you see anything? Professor McGonagall asked softly by the bedside. She still couldn't believe Harry would secretly learn the dark arts, let alone kill a dragon at the age of 15. Not yet. But I believe Harry's innocent. Dumbledore slowly turned, his azure eyes scanning the crowd, but his expression was a little tired. His previous inspection had revealed nothing unusual about Harry, whether a curse or otherwise. This meant that Harry had no excuse for using the killing curse and would have to bear the weight of public opinion alone. Alice. Professor McGonagall sighed deeply. Dumbledore's response reminded her of the consequences. Innocent? That requires proof. Old Barty remarked once again, unseemly. Shut up. Can't you see my student is resting? Professor McGonagall lowered her voice, but the anger in her tone was unmistakable. Then let him rest. I'll wait for him. Old Barty's temper was clearly flaring. He said this and headed out the door without a backward glance. Seeing Professor McGonagall about to lose her temper, Bagman once again acted as a soothing agent, offering solace. Minerva, don't be angry. I bet he's never been like this before. But don't worry, I'll help you with this. For a moment, Bagman longed to find Marcus and renegotiate the sales share. As the head of sports, he was truly consumed by the Triwizard Tournament. Unlike Professor McGonagall's irritation, Dumbledore remained silent, watching old Barty's retreat thoughtfully. As for Harry, he seemed oblivious to everything around him, still sound asleep. Time always slips through your fingers like fine sand. Silently, yet ever so faintly, it leaves a trace. When dawn broke, the day after the tournament, the entire British Isles erupted in excitement. Simply because the Daily Prophet, with its eye-catching headline in bold, half a page, adorned it with a headline, The Savior and the Killing Curse. Below the headline was a 5-inch black and white photograph. In the photo, Harry, with a stony expression, held his wand in one hand, pointed at a distant Hungarian tree-crest dragon. The 65-foot-long, ferocious-looking dragon lay motionless on the ground, as if it had drunk 2 gallons of dreamless sleeping potion. The combination of these two words, Savior and Killing Curse, easily brought back memories of those wild days for adult wizards over the age of 25. And that wasn't all, because today, the Daily Prophet and the Photoscope had reached a rare bundled sale. The newspapers were divided into 2 sections, the first being the standard 2-nut copy, unchanged. The other type came with a 2-inch, seemingly simple-looking videoscope. The price of this newspaper had already soared to 5 sickles per copy. Although the price had increased several times, the hype and headline seemed to have many willing to pay. After all, whether wizard or muggle, there were always those who naturally enjoyed watching the excitement, and 5 sickles wasn't expensive. In the Slytherin dormitory, Ino put down the newspaper and turned to Draco. You said someone was spreading the rumor that Harry was the second Dark Lord. Yes. Draco nodded seriously, then said seriously, yesterday evening, someone found a blood-stained letter in the 4th floor corridor. It read, to the second Dark Lord, His Majesty, Harry Potter. Ino listened quietly to Draco's story. It read like a novel, bizarre and absurd. But he also knew that the more absurd a story, the more likely it was to find a market, because it satisfied people's need for conversation. It's easy to imagine that once this story became public knowledge, Harry would face unprecedented criticism. Unlike the original story, Chamber of Secrets, where the heir of Slytherin was killed, Harry used the killing curse to slay the dragon, not only in public but also on video. Harry's strength, background, and fame, all of them fulfilled the criteria for public criticism of celebrities. Most importantly, there were no riots at the Quidditch World Cup, and no dark mark either. This gradually caused everyone to forget about Voldemort and instead set their sights on Harry. In the silent dormitory, Draco saw Ino fall silent and suddenly felt that the world was insane. The person he had bullied for 3 years turned out to be the second Dark Lord? He had even hung him in midair. The thought gave Draco a sudden chill, and he asked cautiously, "Ino, is there really something wrong with Scarhead? Don't let it fool you. Just don't mess with him." Ino frowned subconsciously. Draco's reaction seemed understandable, but it also seemed to represent the attitudes of the other young wizards in the castle. Rumors are terrifying, and if Harry lived in this kind of environment, even if he was perfectly fine, something would have been said about him. And this time, it wasn't just limited to the castle. Ino glanced again at the newspaper tossed on the table. He was now certain that the old headmaster had truly gone too far this time. It seemed that, judging by Dumbledore's meticulous planning in the original story, it was only within the castle. Whenever he attempted to plan outside Hogwarts, Dumbledore was always on the defensive. And that was probably the situation right now. The overwhelming evidence, coupled with the external newspaper reports, the blood-stained letters, and the crude rumors about the Dark Lord. A long pause. "Draco, do you think a wizard who can hold 12 newts is truly exceptional?" Before Draco could respond, Ino slowly stood up. He had to go and warn Dumbledore before the situation got out of hand. Phew. It's been quite a brain burner lately. But Zyodi tried his best to ride every chapter of the story. Chapter 340, Preparing for a Rainy Day, Hogwarts Industry. Perhaps it was the nature of snakes, or perhaps it was simply Salazar Slytherin's personal preference. The Slytherin dormitory, nestled beneath the castle, always immersed the young wizards in a profound and exquisite silence. In the dormitory, Ino stood, paused for a few seconds, then sat back down in his chair. Just now, he'd suddenly thought of the castle's murals. Besides the dormitory, murals dotted the corridors. It wouldn't have been so bad if the blood-stained letter hadn't been there. With it, Dumbledore would have easily tracked down the person who lost it. He must have become wary after unraveling the mystery. Suddenly, his anxiety subsided. After all, no matter who was hiding, their target was Harry, and they probably wouldn't destroy the castle or even harm anyone else. As for Harry, he already had enough people around him. Besides, he felt that going to Dumbledore now was simply a matter of seeing that he had too much free time, so he just went to see him. Gradually, as he figured it all out, Ino shifted to a more comfortable position, half lying back on the high-back chair. "Draco, have you decided on a name for your monthly magazine? There's only a month left. If it works, maybe we can release it early. Now's a good time." Draco was momentarily taken aback by the sudden change of topic. A few seconds later, he hesitantly spoke. "I've actually decided on a name. It's called Once Upon a Time at Hogwarts. After all, the monthly isn't about news, it's just a second look at past events." Draco's words piqued Ino's interest. Finding new content in history and the past is similar to the storytelling of a bard. "That's great." Ino agreed. "When you graduate and hand this over to the next Slytherin, you could create a companion volume called Once Upon a Time in England. That would be great, too." Once Upon a Time in England. Draco rolled his eyes thoughtfully, as if conjuring up a thought. But after a moment, Draco became dejected again. "That's great. But I can't even finish Once Upon a Time at Hogwarts right now. I thought it was too simple." Draco was frustrated. From the time he came up with the idea to the time he put it into action, so many days had passed, and he had only become the head of Hogwarts News. As for the publication, it was truly a long way off. I've ordered the equipment, but I don't have the staff. They're all students. Even if someone was willing to accept my employment, there's no place for them to work. The dormitories are bad, the abandoned classrooms have that annoying filch, and outside the castle there's too much traffic." Draco complained, recounting his grievances and difficulties. "Those are minor issues. Ino took over decisively, ignoring Draco's surprised look, and continued, I have a group of very dedicated staff members. I can also arrange a classroom for you in the castle, one where you won't be disturbed. You can prohibit anyone from entering except the headmaster. That's fantastic. Before he could finish his words, Draco suddenly stood up. He felt his happiness had come abruptly. As the castle's hidden news chief, possessing information without being able to publish it was truly a torture. Don't be too happy yet, I have conditions. Ino reached out and gently tapped the armrest of his chair. You tell me. I'll agree to it, no matter what. After hearing the conditions, Draco turned around, resting his hands on the table, his eyes sincere as he made the promise. He had originally founded this monthly magazine for fun, not profit. He wouldn't mind giving it all to Ino. The equipment needed to print the magazine wasn't worth a few hundred galleons. Ino sensed Draco's hidden agenda, but he had no intention of turning the tables and usurping his friend's property. Sitting in his chair, he raised his hand and held up 2 fingers. 2 points. First, the location. I can find a suitable place, but the castle isn't my property, so you'll need to pay Hogwarts a certain rent. This cannot be changed. Regarding the rent for the castle, Ino had made a carefully considered choice. Although Hogwarts is a prestigious, millennia-old school, it's effectively controlled by its 12 trustees, as all the castle's expenses are funded by external grants. It's absurd to think that Hogwarts, a vast institution with its castle, Forbidden Forest, Black Lake, Herb Greenhouse, and so on, lacks a single publicly owned enterprise. To put it mildly, it's funded, but to put it bluntly, the castle relies on donations from others for everything. If those funds ceased, Hogwarts wouldn't even be able to pay its professors' salaries. This is precisely why Dumbledore was so easily expelled from the school in the Tale of the Basilisk. Ordinary people often assume the headmaster reigns supreme, but that only applies to prestigious headmasters. With just an ordinary headmaster, the 12 trustees can assert their power and authority. Somehow, Ino recalled an interesting phenomenon from the original story. During his first year, Draco constantly mentioned his father, the trustee, and acted like the master of the castle. Perhaps this was simply a habitual habit shaped by what he'd seen and heard at home. Unfortunately, Draco met a headmaster named Dumbledore, and ultimately even lost his inherited Malfoy position on the board. Planning ahead. Ever since seeing his name in the admissions book, Ino had considered developing Hogwarts and escaping its reliance on others. However, at the time, he was only thinking about developing the Forbidden Forest and expanding greenhouse cultivation. But today, by coincidence, Draco's monthly magazine had given him a heads up. This could be considered a campus business that relied on Hogwarts. Even if the money wasn't much, it could still be used to install a few magical lights on the freshman path. At the same time, upon hearing that it was just rent, Draco agreed without a second thought. No problem, rent or anything else, it's a small matter. What about your second point? Facing Draco's anxiety, Ino remained calm and gently waved his hand. The second point isn't urgent. It's about negotiating the salaries of my small staff. I'll introduce you to them once we find a place. With that, Ino stood up again. Where are you going? Draco asked curiously. I'm going to see Professor McGonagall. I'm going to set your rent. As Ino spoke, he lightly snapped his fingers, and the robes on the hanger flew over obediently. At Hogwarts, the deputy headmaster was far more reliable than the real headmaster in matters concerning the operation of the castle. The castle corridor. After leaving the Slytherin common room, Ino walked up the stairs all the way to Professor McGonagall's office. Of course, there were some polite responses along the way. But this time, the people who greeted him were unusually mostly boys. It seemed that after holding hands yesterday, some loudspeaker had broadcast it. Ino didn't care about it. Unless he imitated Dumbledore and remained single for the rest of his life, and when he was old, some grandmothers would establish the Dumbledore Research Society for him. Otherwise, it was only a matter of time before he would suffer the same fate as he did now. Chapter 341 Professor McGonagall, Legal Contract. On the 6th floor of the castle, in the Transfiguration office, Professor McGonagall sat alone at her desk, feeling a little exhausted by the events of the past 2 days. It had been a perfectly normal Triwizard tournament, but an unexpected incident had escalated into the situation. While it wasn't clear how this would be reported abroad, it seemed unlikely to be anything complimentary. Perhaps Hogwarts could truly replace Durmstrang as Europe's most tolerant school of magic towards the dark arts. The thought gave her a headache, even as she sat in her office. With a helpless sigh, Professor McGonagall stood up and slowly walked to the window, gazing out at the view outside the castle. The frozen black lake in winter, the slightly bleak forbidden forest, everything gave her a sense of belonging. Knock, knock, knock. A rhythmic knock sounded at the door. Come in. Professor McGonagall, coming to her senses, waved her wand, causing the door to open automatically. Good day, Professor, Ino greeted with a smile as she entered the office. It had only been a single day, but Professor McGonagall seemed different from her usual capable self today, appearing considerably older. Ino. Professor McGonagall was a bit surprised by the sudden visit, but quickly recovered, jokingly saying, "You're supposed to be busier than I am at this hour. It's amazing you came to see me. Look at what you're saying. No matter how busy I am, I'm just one student," Ino replied calmly. Truthfully, Professor McGonagall's ability to joke was a sign of genuine agreement. Okay, excellent student. Tell me about your purpose. If I remember correctly, apart from that animagus visit, you haven't visited me on your own initiative before. Upon hearing the answer, Professor McGonagall stopped beating around the bush and got straight to the point. It's my roommate, Draco. He wants to start a monthly magazine, something for entertainment. Ino pulled up a chair nearby, sat down, and began to unpack his ideas. Within minutes, he had finished his story. Seeing Professor McGonagall lost in thought, Ino politely remained silent. A moment later. I agree in principle. Professor McGonagall nodded slightly, setting the tone for the matter. Hearing this, Ino didn't speak immediately, as it was clear that Professor McGonagall had more to say. Sure enough, after a brief pause, Professor McGonagall continued, "There's one thing I need to clarify up front. I don't care what your magazine writes, but it can't involve professors, or at least not too much. Otherwise, it would be very difficult for me." As Professor McGonagall spoke, she quietly observed Ino's reaction. Honestly, if it weren't for the student in front of her, she wouldn't have considered the feasibility of this matter at all. It was mainly because of the young wizard's whimsical personality. Once the novelty wore off, he wouldn't be able to stick with it for long. Over the decades, young wizards at Hogwarts had suddenly had the idea of starting a newspaper, but in reality, it was just a whim. On the other hand, upon hearing the request not to involve the professors, Ino immediately expressed his thoughts. Don't worry about that. The students' joys, sorrows, grudges, and grievances will never concern the professors. Of course, if something is truly unfair, I'll mention it, but it's never the mainstream. Professor McGonagall nodded with satisfaction at this response. Especially the last part. If Ino had guaranteed that the professors wouldn't be involved, she would have found it unusual. Go ahead. I give you the power. As she spoke, Professor McGonagall opened her desk drawer, pulled out a fresh piece of parchment, and scribbled something quickly on it. For a long moment, Ino froze in his tracks, staring at the signed parchment before him. He had been discussing the rent, but who would have thought Professor McGonagall hadn't mentioned it at all? But since Professor McGonagall hadn't mentioned it, he couldn't pretend ignorance. After all, no matter how big or small the matter was, there had to be a rule. Professor, you seem to have forgotten something? For example, the rent. After all, Hogwarts isn't in charge of this. After a moment's deliberation, Ino took the initiative to raise the rent issue. 2 hours later, Ino left the Transfiguration office, holding a piece of parchment that clearly resembled a contract. Walking down the street, recalling Professor McGonagall's stunned expression, he felt a wave of amusement. It seemed like in all his decades of teaching, this was the first time Professor McGonagall had ever encountered someone paying rent on their own initiative. Strolling down the corridor, Ino picked up the parchment again. The texture was identical to ordinary parchment, except for the Hogwarts shield emblazoned directly above it. The rent is 7 galleons a year. Now it's legal. Looking at the coat of arms and Professor McGonagall's signature on the parchment, everything was now legal. Even Dumbledore couldn't terminate the contract. In the wizarding world, formal contracts always hold a mysterious power. Especially now, as Ino held the parchment, he could sense a subtle connection between it and the castle. Everything is difficult at the beginning. As one of the 3 most prestigious schools in Ruba, Hogwarts now had its own property. While it only brought in a mere 7 galleons annually, No matter how small, it was essentially independent of the 12 trustees. Once there's one, there's another, and as time goes on, perhaps one day, Hogwarts will truly become as independent and transcendent as Vaux-Bretons in France. Draco returned to his dormitories. Seeing the contract with the skull crest and signatures, he was filled with excitement. His face was filled with joy, as if he had downed several bottles of euphoria. I know. That's great, seriously. Draco paced back and forth in his dormitories, as if this was the only way to vent his restless energy. Let's find a place now. Oh, right. I need to write a letter first, and ask them to send the equipment. He muttered to himself, wanting to get dressed and go out, then rushing to write a letter. He simply didn't know what to do. I'll find the place. You write the letter now. While the castle is buzzing these days, don't wait until Christmas. Let's get the first issue out as soon as possible. Ino leaned back in his chair and expressed his thoughts. He had just spent over 2 hours in Professor McGonagall's office, but the actual signing of the contract and the rent negotiation only took a little over half an hour. The rest of the time, he listened to Professor McGonagall discussing the past 2 days, focusing on Barty Crouch SR's paranoia, who practically slept in the hospital wing. Hence, Ino's current idea, to get the magazine out as soon as possible and expose Barty Crouch Sr. Did he pride himself on being impartial? This would be a good opportunity for everyone to see the double standard of being strict with others and lenient with oneself. After all, the British wizarding community is quite small. If the young wizards at Hogwarts knew, then practically all of England would know. Chapter 342 Changes Brought by Time. Time flows like water. The changes it brings often occur unexpectedly. Just as reflections in water gradually blur with the ripples, so too does the passage of time make many memories become distant and hazy. 3 full days had passed since the first match. During this time, many unbelievable events had occurred within the castle. First and foremost, a monthly magazine called Hogwarts Once Upon a Time suddenly appeared. Headquartered outside the castle, in an abandoned herbology greenhouse, it was run by Slytherin Draco Malfoy. Of course, these weren't the main points. The quality of a magazine isn't measured by these external factors, it's measured by its content. And in terms of content, Hogwarts Once Upon a Time delivered a near-perfect score in its first issue. It detailed the events of the castle, from rejected confessions to being caught on dates to even instances of secretly holding hands. The writing was witty and humorous, and the angles were equally insightful. Although much had already transpired, every young wizard, whether they knew about it or not, found it entertaining. Besides castle gossip, the magazine also covered current hot topics, the Goblet of Fire and the Warrior, and the Savior, Harry Potter. Among all the content, one article, titled The Mask of Hypocrisy, captured everyone's attention. It featured Bartemius Crouch, one of the 7 current directors of magic at the Ministry of Magic, and his Death Eater son, Bartemius Crouch. While most magazines wouldn't dare to touch upon an official of Bartemius's rank, seeing the last names of Swinburne and Malfoy on the back page made all the difference. Bartemius Crouch is going too far. Ron, throwing down his magazine, complained indignantly in the Gryffindor common room. He keeps staring at Harry, and what's his excuse? He's claiming to be fair? He doesn't even look in the mirror. Ron's complaint resonated deeply with the common room. Sometimes, young wizards can be incredibly stubborn. Although Harry had publicly slain a dragon with a killing curse, no one was hurt. The fear of the killing curse gradually faded with time. Yes, Harry made a mistake, but it's not the place for those devil-faced people to criticize him. Neville calmly expressed his opinion in the crowd. It seemed a change in his mindset, or perhaps just his usual silence. Whenever Neville spoke, few people would interrupt. Today was no different. Seamus and Ron waited until Neville finished before continuing their comments. Coincidentally, the discussion about Barty Crouch wasn't unique to the Gryffindor common room. Similar discussions were common in the other 3 houses. To boost word of mouth, Draco printed 400 copies of the first issue of Once Upon a Time at Hogwarts and distributed them free of charge to the 4 house common rooms. Public opinion was fermenting. Barty Crouch, the man involved, experienced a real struggle in the castle. It seemed that wherever he went, someone would make sarcastic remarks. There were even rumors that Hagrid's hounds barked at him. Meanwhile, Bartlett, the man involved, was alone in the Hogwarts headmaster's office. Albus I feel like I've lost a lot of my memories. Someone cast a memory charm on me. Bartlett sat on the sofa, scratching at his few remaining hairs in distress. Dumbledore didn't directly respond to Bartlett's distress. He first glanced at the hardcover magazine Hogwarts passed on the table. After a moment's contemplation, he slowly spoke. I'm curious. Is what said there true? Were you the one who switched little Bartlett? I don't know. I even forgot I had a son. Bartlett answered truthfully, without concealing anything. It was precisely because he couldn't remember having a son that he was convinced his memory had been tampered with. Bartlett vaguely remembered having a son, and his son's excellent academic performance had once been a source of pride for him. Albus, help me. If it's true as this magazine says, I'm doomed. But please, at all costs, capture him, life or death. Barty Sr. looked pained, but he persevered through all his instructions, his expression especially resolute at the end. Although he had forgotten his son, he remembered the madness of the Death Eaters during those dark days. Dumbledore silently observed the wizard before him. Once upon a time, Barty Sr. had led the Aurors and Strikers on the front lines. During the years of Voldemort's rampage, Barty Sr. had headed the Department of Magical Law Enforcement, his iron-blooded and unwavering style a pillar of support for many ordinary wizards. If it weren't for Barty Jr., who was eventually revealed to be a hidden Death Eater, Fudge wouldn't have been able to become England's Minister of Magic today. Time flies, years flow like a song. The once iron-blooded director was now just an ordinary, weary-looking man. Dumbledore understood Barty Sr.'s plight, the pain that comes from the conflict between emotions and ideals. The only difference was that Barty Sr. ultimately chose emotion over his own principles. Bartius. Dumbledore spoke slowly. I cannot interfere in the affairs of the Ministry of Magic. Everyone must be responsible for their own actions. But rest assured, I will take young Barty's case very seriously. That's enough. Hearing this, Barty Sr. breathed a sigh of relief. What else do you need to know? Tell me as soon as possible. Before the Ministry of Magic takes me away. Oh, and by the way, no matter what, I will take care of Harry's case. Barty Sr. then brought up Harry's case again. Anyone capable of leading the Department of Law Enforcement against Voldemort was likely no fool. After discovering his memory had been tampered with, Barty Sr. sensed a conspiracy. Considering the events of the past week, the other party's goal was clear. Barty Sr. chose to take the blame for Harry's crime. Although he didn't know the Hidden One's plans, that didn't matter. As long as he prevented them from achieving their desired outcome, that was all that mattered. With Barty Sr.'s stance made clear, the headmaster's office fell silent. Dumbledore didn't answer Barty Sr. Instead, his gaze turned to the candy cabinet. The door swung open, revealing a shallow stone basin. The basin was of simple, antique design, its edges intricately carved with runes and symbols. It was filled with a silvery substance that, like clouds, resembled both liquid and gas. Old friend. Don't rush to assume responsibility. As I said, everyone is solely responsible for their own actions. Dumbledore said with a smile, his address subtly changing. The Obliviate Charm is not to be feared. Except for those cast by those skilled in the Obliviate Charm, ordinary Obliviates can be temporarily restored with a pensieve. As he spoke, Dumbledore stood and walked towards the pensieve, a flicker of regret in his eyes. As for the person skilled in the Obliviate Charm, if nothing unexpected happens, he should still be in Azkaban. It's late July. Ziote, please vote. Please vote. Please vote. Thank you all for your support. Ziote's sharing today, the pensieve. A pensieve is an item used to access memories, and one is found in the headmaster's office at Hogwarts. It's a shallow stone basin with runes and symbols carved around its rim. It's filled with a silvery substance that, like clouds, resembles both a liquid and a gas. Pensieves are extremely rare, as only the most powerful wizards use them, and most wouldn't dare to do so. Chapter 343, Old Barty's Memory, The Resurrection of Voldemort. On the 8th floor, in the headmaster's office, the walls were covered with portraits of past headmasters. Each painting seemed to epitomize a magical story. They sat quietly in the room, sometimes recounting their past legends and glories, sometimes feigning sleep and snoring, but no matter what, they remained unmoved by the outside world. At that moment, all the portraits maintained a perfectly still silence, curiously watching the two people in the office. In the room, a silver, ribbon-like thread drifted into the pensieve. With Barty Sr.'s consent, Dumbledore leaned over and examined his memories. Time passed, minute by minute. It seemed like an eternity. When Dumbledore stood up again, his expression had lost its previous composure and had grown serious. How could he be so reckless? In contrast to Dumbledore's seriousness, Barty's eyes flashed with fear and horror. He is really resurrected. The fragments of memory nearly overturned Barty's understanding. A man, declared dead, was miraculously resurrected through ritual magic, and he had even contributed to this magic. Albus. Everyone must know this. We must prepare in advance. Barty Sr. spoke anxiously, but Dumbledore interrupted him mid-sentence with a wave of his hand. Let me think. Sit quietly for a moment. Dumbledore finished, and then he sank into a near trance. The memory flashed back, showing Voldemort completing the resurrection ritual through Barty's forced blood, Barty's voluntary flesh, and the bones of his Muggle father. Advanced dark arts revealed Dumbledore opened a drawer, revealing the black-bound spellbook nestled safely inside. As the headmaster of Hogwarts and a legendary wizard of the 20th century, Dumbledore understood Horcruxes in detail, from their creation to their resurrection, and even their actual use. Blood, flesh, and bone, a near reconstruction of a new body, infused with the soul of the Horcrux, to complete the resurrection. Dumbledore understood, but he believed Voldemort knew better. Especially after suffering twice at the hands of Harry, the choice of resurrection should have favored Harry. After all, only someone sharing Harry's bloodline could have confused Lily's ancient protective magic. Otherwise, given Voldemort's character, he wouldn't have left such an obvious flaw, otherwise Harry would have been his natural nemesis. However, after reviewing Barty's memories, Dumbledore felt he must have overlooked something. His long-held strategy of protecting Harry and waiting seemed to have had no effect. Why would he do this? Dumbledore muttered to himself. Barty's memories brought a long-lost sense of confusion to him. At the same time, at the northernmost tip of England, 140 kilometers from the coast, on an uninhabited island composed entirely of reefs, a voice echoed from a weathered lighthouse, sharing Dumbledore's bewilderment. Master. I don't understand why you let him go. I have nothing to do with him anymore. Barty Jr. felt a pang of shame. He could have killed Barty Sr., eliminating his future troubles, but in the end, he chose to erase his memory. All this made him subconsciously believe that it was because of him that Barty Sr. survived. Thinking of this, Barty Jr.'s expression grew even more respectful. Before Barty Jr. sat a figure with a twisted, pale face, a figure long eroded by darkness and curse. His scarlet eyes shone with cruelty and murder, his flat, snake-like nose, and the cold, eerie smile that curled around his lips was a constant source of chilling fear. Barty Jr. My child. Voldemort's elegant London accent echoed. He glanced at the tea on the table, then at Barty's mutilated hand. Barty Jr., who had been standing nearby, instantly prostrated himself at Voldemort's feet upon being called. I thought everything was broken, but then I discovered, beyond the brokenness, there's true wholeness. Voldemort reached out and patted Barty's tangled hair, as if caressing a pet. Master. Barty looked up in confusion. SHH. Voldemort raised his finger in a hushed gesture. Interesting. But I guess my dear professor is still in the dark. As if truly having thought of something interesting, Voldemort let out a laugh like an owl. While it was chilling, upon closer listening, a hint of reminiscence lingered in the sound. Just as Dumbledore understood Horcruxes and the dark arts, as a powerful wizard, Voldemort also knew many of the secrets of magic. Over half a century of travel, he had seen countless magical artifacts and ancient alchemical artifacts, from ancient Egyptian ruins to Mesopotamian sites. Everything he saw and heard, from the smallest things like the looking glass and sketching quill to the largest things like the time turner and relics of the four founders, even the philosopher's stone, which he had only glimpsed briefly, left him with a sense of incompleteness. However, there was a single summer 3 years ago. In the corridors of Hogwarts, clinging to Quirrell, he saw something very different. The timid Slytherin freshman pulled a die from his pocket. He had thought it was just a child's alchemical toy, but when the die was held in his hand, he felt a sense of innate completeness. A complete alchemical object, something he had never seen before. Because no matter how useless something was, as long as it was complete, there must be complete magic and complete rules behind it. At this thought, a hint of regret crossed Voldemort's crimson eyes. If it weren't for his initial hopes for the Philosopher's Stone, If it weren't for the fact that he was trapped in Hogwarts and couldn't escape, all these factors would have caused him to miss the perfect opportunity. Now, thanks to the Daily Prophet, he knew that his once timid student had grown to an absurd level of rapidity. Uncontrollably, images surfaced in Voldemort's mind, the images from the so-called telescope. A phoenix as blue as Fiendfire, a normal phoenix as orange-red as a normal phoenix, a 20-foot whale patroness capable of carrying wizards, and the latest reports, the Triwizard Tournament, figures beneath the snow. Slowly, his thoughts drifted back to the present. Voldemort glanced at Barty, the servant beside him. He trusted this servant, but he had no intention of sharing his plans. Some things, only known to a limited number of people, can truly confuse the castle's wise professors and lead them to misjudge. Harry Potter. Harry's name, with its distinctive tone, echoed once again through the weathered lighthouse. At the same time, Barty's eyes lit up with hatred upon hearing the name. He undoubtedly knew his master's plan, and Harry Potter was undoubtedly his primary target. Sitting in his chair, Voldemort could easily see Barty's expression. Sensing the servant's hateful gaze, a strange smile curled his lips. "My child. Now you can return and continue contacting that student," swaying him firmly to our side. "It might prove useful in a crucial moment." Chapter 344 The Camellia Blooms. It was mid-December. It was an ordinary weekend, a fine, misty rain mixed with a few scattered snowflakes, drizzling down onto the ground. Perhaps it was the wrong season, or perhaps it was the accompanying rain, but the falling snow never lingered. Each flake often vanished before it even touched the ground. Horizontal ellipsis. Although Christmas was approaching, the gray sky, coupled with the cold and damp air, had plunged the young wizards of the castle into a near hibernation state. Everything seemed bleak and silent. A roaring fireplace, a warm common room. No one wanted to leave this comfortable environment unless absolutely necessary. But this only applied to the young wizards of the castle. Horizontal ellipsis. Outside the main building, in an abandoned greenhouse, a different scene unfolded. "Timmy, Nello, print this photo in, and remember to use special fonts to mark it," Draco, seated at a large desk, instructed a compartment on the other side of the room. The once deserted room was now adorned with splendor, with no fewer than a dozen magical lamps adorning the walls alone. The warm orange light seemed even more inviting in the dim winter. "Roger. My boss," a childish voice replied. Then the cubicle door swung open, and out ran a tiny puppet, about a foot tall. It scurried to the table, picked up the photo, and quickly returned to its original cubicle, closing the door behind it. As the puppet left, Draco glanced at another table beside him. On it sat a badge labeled, Associate Editor, Special Correspondent. "Colin. I'll give you another 5 galleons. Collect more interesting news, Scarhead." "No, the Potter news is out of date." Hearing his name being called, Colin looked up blankly. A moment passed before a look of resignation settled on his face. "It's out of date, but there's nothing new going on lately. Otherwise, I'd have to write about Miss Delacour's scandal." Colin felt a wave of pressure. Lately, the castle had become as still as a pool of water, unusually quiet. The explosive news from 2 weeks ago was no longer there. Thinking back to just 2 weeks ago, Colin couldn't help but recall the dramatic changes during that period. First, Harry's innocence was vindicated, and the truth about the killing curse was revealed. According to the Daily Prophet, the culprit was an unknown dark wizard who first attacked Director Crouch and then manipulated him to cast a dark curse on Harry. It sounded a bit ridiculous, but no one doubted its authenticity. The reason was simple: the attack had severely injured Bartemius Crouch, director of the Department of International Magical Cooperation, and he was forced to resign. The Ministry of Magic only had 7 departments, so each director held real power, even wielding the power to challenge the minister. Dismissing a director simply to defend Harry? No joke, no one in the wizarding world would believe such a reason. Even with Harry's immense reputation, such a thing wouldn't happen. What a shame no one verified Barty Jr.'s authenticity. Colin sighed regretfully at his workstation. He had written the article The Mask of Hypocrisy. Despite widespread rumors in the castle, the Ministry of Magic turned a blind eye, not even questioning the situation. Draco, overhearing Colin's sighs, shook his head with amusement, and said aloud, "Don't feel sorry for him anymore. No one would really give old Barty a hard time, especially since he's resigned voluntarily." While it was amusing that Colin couldn't grasp the situation, Draco knew that even his father, Lucius, couldn't grasp the situation clearly. The ministry had suddenly become strange over the past 2 weeks. So much so that when he received a letter from home, it contained only one instruction: stay close to Ino and maintain and strengthen the existing relationship. While they understood it was a sign of concern, Draco felt a certain resentment towards its content. Friends shouldn't be entangled in utilitarianism. So, after receiving the letter, he spread it out on his dorm desk. Knock. Knock. Suddenly, a series of rapid knocks on the door interrupted Draco's thoughts. Come in. As the words fell, a girl with golden twintails walked through the door. Draco recognized her, the Abbott girl, a regular at the information department of their Hogwarts past. I'm back to sell news again, Hannah said with a cheerful stride, her golden twintails swaying from side to side. My pleasure. Please take a seat, Miss Abbott. Draco stood up. The girl before him was the foundation of their magazine. Hearing this, Hannah didn't hesitate, plopped down on the nearby reception sofa, then crossed her legs, looking mature beyond her years. Today's news: at 9:30 a.m., Ino and Granger were seen dating in the astronomy tower. 7th-year Ravenclaw head of the house, Gurgen, sent a love letter to Delacour at 11 a.m., but it was switched. Hannah spoke slowly, her automatic writing quill scribbling rapidly. Horizontal ellipsis. HU, in the shelter, Ino rubbed his sore nose. It was undoubtedly another case of someone gossiping behind his back. He couldn't do anything about it, after all, the mouths belonged to other people. Unless he followed Voldemort's example and cursed his name, even Dumbledore would be gossiped about behind his back. Even with this in mind, he didn't forget the purpose of his visit. He sat down under the oak tree and began to sort through the scattered gems. With Christmas approaching, and also because of a casual remark George and Fred had made earlier, Ino planned to use the gems to craft a pair of beautiful straw rings. No matter what, the proper sense of ritual was necessary. He had once received a basket of straw rings, but he never imagined that one day he would give them away, and this one, handmade. It seemed a true testament to the fickleness of fate. Horizontal ellipsis. A 10-foot oak tree. The ground beneath the tree was piled high with gems of all kinds, their shimmering light echoing with a colorful river in the sky. Ino sat down on the ground. After careful consideration, he chose 2 moonstones that shone with a soft, white hue. Moonstone, of course, also has a romantic name, the Lover's Stone. It symbolizes tenderness and purity, and this gem is known for its moonlight effect. When illuminated by light, it exhibits a warm, delicate luster like moonlight. After selecting and confirming the materials, Ino stood up and headed towards the icy path outside the valley. Sure enough, around Christmas, a new story would unfold here. There were red maple trees laden with stories, creeping anacondas, but the most captivating attraction was the azure blue ice flower. Though only a 2-foot-long branch, it blossomed into a flower the size of a teacup. Deep blue stamens and azure petals, layered and distinct, were not only pleasing to the eye but also exuding a fresh and elegant air. Camellia. Ino recognized a blooming ice flower immediately due to its unique shape. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelis. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 345: A Different Christmas. Christmas. A holiday that should have had little to do with wizards, yet who knows how it became their most anticipated holiday. As the week drew to a close, the castle grew busier by the day. Everyone was in a state of excitement, for this year's Christmas dinner would be different. Rumors circulated that Dumbledore had ordered 500 barrels of mead from the 3 broomsticks, and even more that the Weird Sisters and Ino would perform together on the day of the dinner. Of course, even more exciting and agitated than all this news was the legendary Yule Ball. This was perfectly normal. Teenagers always yearn for adult life, and balls fulfilled that yearning. After all, traditionally, balls were reserved for independent adults. Breakfast was over. At the Gryffindor table, Ron proudly told Harry that he had found a dance partner and had even ordered a respectable tuxedo. Dude. Listen, you better hurry up, or all the good girls will be picked up. Ron, looking like a seasoned veteran, patted Harry's shoulder. Well, maybe there's no need to rush. Harry ate, glancing at the girl at the next table. Ginny. As Harry looked over, Ron's expression was odd. It felt like a blessing, yet also like unhappiness, like someone's treasure had been stolen. At that moment, Ron felt an indescribable mixture of emotions. Meanwhile, perhaps girls are naturally sensitive to gazes, Ginny quietly turned her head upon noticing them. The moment she caught sight of Harry, she returned his gentle smile, while Ron, standing beside her, subconsciously ignored her. As for Harry, he just stared blankly at Ginny. Okay. She's been fond of you since she was a kid anyway, Ron said, resigned after noticing the two exchanging glances. Coincidentally, in the Great Hall, it wasn't just the Gryffindors discussing the ball, the Slytherins were also discussing it. Compared to the boisterous Gryffindor crowd, the little snakes were much more reserved. What do you think of the ball? That Granger got a free ride? Daphne asked resentfully at the table. Hearing Daphne's question, Pansy calmly raised her head and said, "If you like her, feel free to pursue her. You really don't have to worry about me." Daphne, like a cat with its fur standing on end, snorted coldly, "HMPH. I'm doing this for your own good, and you don't appreciate it. This is your last chance, if you..." Perhaps out of consideration for her friend's feelings, Daphne held back the last sentence. Pansy smiled, her voice still calm. "Thank you for your kindness. But I remember saying before that so many people break up because of graduation." "There you go again." Daphne interrupted without hesitation. "Yes, many break up after graduation, but many also have children after graduation." "Never mind, I don't care." Apparently a little annoyed, Daphne stood up and walked out of the auditorium. Watching Daphne's angry back, Pansy remained firmly seated on her stool. Her gaze shifted, and no one could tell what she was thinking. In the Slytherin dormitories, Ino sat at his desk, a small table covered with a variety of ingenious tools, chisels, files, various gemstone shards, and ink bottles filled with unknown liquids. The surface looked a bit messy. Strawing. Although he had a considerable knowledge of alchemy, this was only his second time making an alchemical item. Thinking of the staff that once resembled a mountaineering stick, Ino couldn't help but smile. To be honest, he had once wanted to emulate Gandalf, but he never really used it in Middle-earth. It was a pity, but not entirely. Regardless, Ino planned to carefully craft a ring before him, striving to fully incorporate all the alchemical knowledge he had learned. With this thought, he picked up the file again, humming a soft song as he carefully polished a piece of moonstone the size of an egg. Time flows like water. 2 days flew by in a flash. As the host of the Triwizard Tournament, Hogwarts seemed eager to impress its guests and was even more determined to showcase the castle at its best to the other two schools. Christmas was still several days away, but the Christmas decorations were already quietly underway. The handrails of the movable staircase were festooned with enchanted icicles, and the Great Hall's ceiling had transformed from its original transparent color into a deep purple starry sky. From time to time, tiny points of light, like a swarm of stars, fell, creating a breathtaking spectacle. The castle's transformations didn't stop there. The suits of armor, already polished to a brilliant shine, were now enchanted by Professor Flitwick himself. Whenever someone passed by, they would hum a few cheerful Christmas carols. Of course, not every suit of armor was like this, as some had even been heard swearing. But that familiar voice made all the young wizards aware that Peeves was hiding within. While the Hogwarts students knew the reason, that didn't necessarily mean Boxburtons and Durmstrang knew. This incident was reported to Professor McGonagall, who flew into rare rage at such a loss of dignity. From then on, Filch's nervous demeanor became a common sight. He would hold a sharpened mopstick, and whenever he passed a suit of armor, he would habitually tap it, muttering a stream of complaints to himself. On the 8th floor of the castle. "Peeves, come out. Don't make me poke you with a stick." Filch tugged at a suit of armor with both hands, gazing threateningly at his weapon. "Oh? Incompetent Filch. You're dreaming of harming Peeves? That's absurd." Despite his outlandish words, Peeves naturally passed through the armor and vanished into the wall. Just when Filch thought he had succeeded, Peeves reappeared in the air in the corridor, this time holding 2 large, unscrewed bottles of ink. Filch, holding the mopstick in one hand, closed his eyes in despair. Suddenly, a calm voice boomed from behind him, "Peeves, get out of here. Boring. Boring. Boring." Despite saying boring 3 times in a row, Peeves, contrary to his usual behavior, walked through the wall and left alone. Elsewhere, After waiting for a long time for ink to show no sign of returning, Filch suddenly opened his eyes. Seeing the person helping him, he was stunned. He remembered the students before him. 4 years ago, they had even had a grudge because he'd scattered snow in the corridor. He hadn't expected him to help today. After a moment's hesitation, Filch whispered, "Thank you." "You're welcome," Ino replied calmly. He had come to give Hermione a straw ring, but had come across this scene and stopped them. With that, Ino walked past Filch without hesitation, heading towards the fat lady's portrait. "It's the end of the month, Zyodi. Please vote. Please vote. Please vote. Thank you all for your support." Chapter 346 The Gift. In the castle's 8th floor corridor. "I've heard your songs. They say they hold so much emotion. I used to be able to do that, but now I'm just painting." The fat lady, standing guard in the Gryffindor common room, spoke with a touch of melancholy. "Don't overthink it, though. Emotions flow from memory. If you can recall something that moved you, then sing. Express it with your voice, with your words." In the 8th floor corridor, Ino and the fat lady discussed singing techniques. He also approached the portraits that appeared so frequently in this story with a kind of check-in mentality. It had been almost 4 years since he'd been at Hogwarts, but there were actually many places he hadn't visited: the fat lady, the kitchens, the Ravenclaw door knocker. His first year was probably out of caution, but after that, the novelty wore off. It was unavoidable. After living in a place for more than a year, the initial excitement faded with time. Outside the Gryffindor common room, Ino and the fat lady chatted for a few minutes. Suddenly, he felt a strange vibration, and then the nearly 9-inch tall portrait of the fat lady was silently opened from behind. "Ino," Hermione said with surprise. "Why didn't you tell me in advance using a two-way mirror? That way I could come find you. Remember, you don't like stairs." "It's nothing. Besides, I can't always let you take the initiative," Ino replied with a pun, glancing at Hermione. Although still wearing plain robes, a closer look revealed a subtle difference. Hermione seemed to be wearing light makeup. Pink lipstick and elongated eyeliner gave her a youthful and beautiful look. The only drawback was that time seemed to have run out for makeup. While the eyeliner was fine, the pink lipstick had a slight flaw, with a bright pink tint at the corner of her mouth. However, Hermione didn't notice Ino's gaze at the moment, or perhaps she didn't care to pay attention. Her focus was on the phrase, "I can't always let you take the initiative." From the summer before elementary school graduation until now, looking back on these past few years, Hermione could easily recall every little detail of their time together. Although they were in different houses and their interactions were rare, each encounter was always joyful. But when exactly did her mindset shift? Hermione pondered for a moment. She vividly remembered her first 2 months at Hogwarts, feeling inexplicably isolated. She felt all alone, like a lion abandoned by a pride. At that moment, her only thought was to return home to her parents in London. But then, a chance encounter in the library corridor. She once again encountered Ino, who not only offered gentle encouragement and solace, but also brought a sense of warmth to this vast, often cold castle. Perhaps from that moment, the seeds had been sown. Though much had changed since then, she had been accepted into Gryffindor and even found friends like Ginny and Parvati. The seeds that had been planted remained unshaken. Gradually, Hermione's lips curled upwards. The seeds she had sown, years of simmering, had finally blossomed. "Dazing off again? Didn't you break that habit after 3rd year?" A teasing voice rang out, snapping Hermione out of her thoughts. She glanced up, angrily, to see Ino standing there, a grin on his face. "Damn it. I don't have a habit of daydreaming. Not before. Not now." Hermione stamped her foot vigorously, as if expressing her displeasure, but a smile remained on her face. But then, Hermione's eyes flickered slightly, as if she'd noticed something, and she changed the subject, saying, "Let's go. Let's go to the astronomy tower. We'll be surrounded if we stay here any longer." "Yes, let's go." Ino nodded. He'd spotted those little hoods hiding in the corner of the corridor long ago. But he hadn't intended to be sneaky from the start. His whole purpose was to be seen, which was a good thing. Thanks to his roommate being the editor-in-chief of a campus magazine, he'd heard some of the rumors, which led to this act today. It was a way to draw attention, to prevent those who were scheming against Hermione. The two walked side by side in a long, dark corridor. But at a turn, They caught a glimpse of snowflakes falling again. The Scottish Highlands in late December seem to truly enjoy snow. Maybe we don't have to go to the astronomy tower. Ice skating on Black Lake would be great. Ino suggested, looking at the falling snow outside. Yes, anywhere. Hermione nodded slightly. The destination didn't matter to her. Outside the castle, as snowflakes drifted, gently covering this ancient and mysterious land, Black Lake transformed into a winter wonderland. The once pitch-black surface was now covered in a layer of floating ice, a thin layer adorned with pure pristine beauty by the falling snow. Dozens of small boats sat quietly at the ferry's new pier. Want a boat? On the lakeside, Ino looked at a boat she once had and suddenly thought rafting might be a good option. The boats glided gently under the magic, breaking the previously calm surface and creating delicate ripples. It seems that in stillness, it's difficult to perceive movement. In less than half an hour, the boat had gradually reached the center of the lake. The castle in the distance, shrouded in a swirling blanket of snow, loomed even more majestic, its towers and spires rising taller against the snowy backdrop. From the boat, the two quietly gazed at the distant scenery, a scene reminiscent of a painting. Suddenly, "Achoo!" A soft, short, nasal sound shattered the silence. "Sorry. I didn't think it through." Upon hearing the sound, Ino immediately realized the problem. His heritage in ice magic had long since made him oblivious to the cold, but Hermione was different. Even though wizards possessed stronger physiques than muggles, rowing in the snow was a bit of a stretch. "It's okay, like this," Hermione said, picking up her wand, immune to water and fire. A flash of white light flashed from the tip of her wand, and the snowflakes in the sky, as if encountering an invisible barrier, skirted around the gliding boat. "I think you need this more than magic." Seeing the snowflakes scattering, Ino also took out the gift box he had prepared long ago from his pocket. It was a 4-inch square box wrapped in blue velvet. An early Christmas present. Hermione reached out to take the box, gently stroking the soft velvet on the surface of the gift box. "Is it a kind of, but it's very special?" Ino smiled mysteriously. However, such an answer aroused Hermione's curiosity. "You know, in the past few years, Ino's Christmas gifts every year have always surprised her. The miniature castle crystal ball in the first year, the automatic writing quill pen in the second year, and the exquisite video mirror in the third year." Thinking of this, Hermione couldn't wait to open the box. Chapter 347 Black Lake in Winter. "Oh my god." Hermione covered her mouth and let out a small sigh of surprise. Within the 4-inch gift box lay a set of jewelry radiating moonlight. The first thing she saw was a beautiful necklace, its chain woven from fine silver thread, and a polished, teardrop-shaped moonstone pendant dangling from its base. Although it was daytime, the moonstone still shone with a mysterious glow. The light was faint, like a gentle dream in the night sky, elegant and beautiful, easily conjuring up the romantic scene of a moonlit stroll. Next to the necklaces were a pair of rings crafted purely from moonstone. The ring's craftsmanship was much simpler, simply a smooth, polished moonstone embossed with straw-like patterns. Yet, Hermione stared intently at these simple rings, her eyes widening as she subconsciously overlooked the more beautiful necklace. For a long time. "Straw ring." Hermione muttered softly after coming to her senses, but quickly raised her head with a haughty air, feigning indifference. "I actually gave it to you, but you never wore it. I guess you've received so many, and I don't know where you threw the one I gave you." Though her tone and demeanor seemed unconcerned, the slight redness in Hermione's eyes and the curled corners of her mouth seemed to silently convey her unrest. "I didn't even throw away the straw ring." Ino took over, sighing softly. In any case, those things were gifts from others. But, after all, they're just standard merchandise, while mine is one of a kind. For example. Hermione arched her brows in a faint smile, as if anticipating an explanation. "Before your answer, you can put on the necklace." Hearing Hermione's question, Ino didn't immediately respond directly. Instead, he pointed to the necklace in the box. "Don't underestimate it. I used practically all my alchemical knowledge in its creation." "Did you make all of this yourself?" Hermione's expression changed again. If just a moment ago she'd been smiling, now she was beaming. "Yes, I made everything. Including the raw materials." Receiving the answer she needed, Hermione picked up the necklace without a word. The silver thread threaded through her fair neck, connecting with the necklace's hidden clasp. A warmth and tranquility washed over her. Even standing by the lake on a winter's day, With snowflakes still falling from the sky, she felt no chill. What is this? Hermione looked up in confusion. Alchemical techniques not only protect against cold and heat, but I've also added many other benefits. Ino explained everything in detail. Compared to the ring, the moonstone necklace was the work he'd truly put so much effort into. Not only was it inscribed with numerous ancient runes, but he'd also added a triggering magic, the iron charm, according to Nicole's notes. A moment. I prefer the straw ring. Though the necklace was more practical, Hermione still expressed her preference crisply. All right. As long as you like it, Ino smiled, spreading his hands and looking at the gift box in Hermione's hands. I gave you your Christmas present early, but isn't it time for you to give me something in return? Following Ino's gaze, Hermione looked down at the ring in the box, which was noticeably larger than the others. Hermione instinctively pursed her lips, then smiled. Well, I'll give it to you now, Mr. Swinburne. It seemed that a harmonious conversation always made one forget the passage of time. Outside the castle, on a vast, calm lake, a small boat drifted gently, windless. The snow fell heavier. On the boat, Hermione leaned comfortably against the wooden beam where the oil lamp hung from the bow. Although her movements and expression were casual, her eyes kept falling on her right hand. On her slender, white finger, she wore a moonstone ring. Likewise, while admiring her own ring, Hermione glanced at Ino's palm, where she saw a matching ring. As if struck by something amusing, Hermione chuckled softly and quietly extended her hand. As the two rings slowly approached and touched, a halo of light, like snowflakes, appeared around them. These cold, shimmering specks resembled falling stars in the night sky. This scene should have been beautiful, but Hermione seemed to be in a playful mood. She kept abruptly moving away from the stars as they appeared, causing the halo to flicker and flicker. Honestly, it wasn't a particularly interesting game, but Hermione never tired of it. On the boat, Ino observed this and smiled silently. Hermione's performance reminded him of his past self. He had also been playing the fire-starting charm in the bridge arch, a little game like using a lighter, for 2 hours without getting tired of it. After a while, the brief playfulness came to an end. Hermione raised her hand to smooth her hair, saying seriously, Potion Felix is still 3 months away, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to make it in time for the second match. Potion Felix. Ino was stunned by the name, but soon remembered that Hermione was referring to the Potion Felix being brewed in the room of requirement. Speaking of potions, Professor Snape's been so rushed lately. Is he still giving you extra lessons? Ino lamented casually. The incident in the first match seemed to have irritated Snape. Although Harry was ultimately fine and not reprimanded by the Ministry, Snape was like a wound-up alarm clock, absent all day except for his usual potions class. Professor Snape? He's been away from me since school started. Hermione shook her head slightly. According to him, if I can brew Potion Felix on my own, there's nothing he can teach me anymore. On the boat, the two chatted idly about Snape. As the main topic of conversation, Snape was currently locked in his cubicle. As the secret chamber where Peter Pettigrew was once imprisoned, one can imagine how secretive it was. The room itself wasn't large, measuring only about 10 square meters. It was silent and dim, illuminated only by a single, burning candlestick. Along one side of the room, along the wall, stood a row of shelves filled with half-processed herbs. Opposite these stood a round stone table. The table wasn't large, about 2 feet in diameter, and upon it sat a boiling cauldron. Beyond the stone table resting the cauldron, at the far end of the room, sat a larger, long wooden table. Snape sat at the table, his brow furrowed as he flipped through a large, age-inspired tome, seemingly facing a difficult problem. Next to the open tome sat a dark-covered volume, its cover emblazoned with the words Advanced Dark Arts revealed in bright red cursive. There was also this chapter, and it was around 9 o'clock. Running out of time, Little D could only delay. Sorry, everyone. Chapter 348, Secrets of Cutting-Edge Black Magic. In the dimly lit Chamber of Secrets, Snape sat silently at his desk, trusting potions more than human hearts. It was just like that night 15 years ago. Everything that happened in Godric's Hollow struck him as absurdly coincidental, as if everything had been meticulously planned and orchestrated. Since then, he had stopped trusting anyone. Just like now, he'd received the answer that Harry was stable, but the sudden appearance of the killing curse on the Quidditch pitch seemed like a silent mockery. What a stable situation. A student barely even in his 5th year had slain a dragon with a single blow. Putting aside the question of whether or not he possessed sufficient magical power, the sheer killing intent alone was beyond the reach of an ordinary adult wizard. Furthermore, everything was based on the resurrection of that person. Under such circumstances, the so-called stability seemed like a complete joke. Horcrux. A soft sigh echoed in the quiet chamber. After a moment, Snape pulled out a drawer to his right, which contained a separate photo album. Long live friendship, Lily Evans. A slightly trembling hand gently stroked the characters on the album cover. He flipped open the album's cover, revealing a strikingly beautiful girl with long crimson hair and almond-shaped green eyes. As if aware of her presence, the girl in the album waved with a radiant smile. Time slipped by in silence. After a long moment, Snape slowly closed the album and wiped the tears from his eyes with his fingers. Then, as if with a firm resolve, his gaze turned firmly to the book beside him. Advanced Dark Arts revealed. He didn't understand Horcruxes, or rather, he only knew about them from books. But that wasn't enough for a potion master. To concoct a targeted potion, one must have direct experience, otherwise, all else was meaningless. And the answer seemed to be only one: craft a Horcrux. With this thought, Snape spread his sleeves. The Ouroboros' dark mark remained faint, but he knew time might be running out. The resurrected figure, strangely choosing to lie dormant, while Dumbledore also seemed to be plotting something. Images of the two kept switching in his mind. For a long moment, Snape suddenly stood up and pulled a small bottle of shimmering golden potion from the nearby shelf. He opened the bottle and drank just the right amount, a tablespoonful. After downing the Felix Felicis potion, Snape sat back down at the table. This time, the previous image disappeared, replaced by a beautiful landscape. Sunrise over the Thames, a dark-haired boy sat in a bridge arch, quietly eating cheap fried fish. Time flew by. December 24th arrived quickly. Normally, this was the Christmas break at Hogwarts, a day off. Leaving by train at this time would allow the young wizards to gather with their families before dusk and spend Christmas Eve together. Unfortunately, no one had chosen to leave for Christmas this year. Consequently, the train parked at the Hogsmeade platform remained stationary for the first time ever. Christmas Eve. Snow had been falling outside the castle since early morning. Bolgsbutton's carriage, as tall as a small house, looked like a frosted pumpkin against the white world. Not far away, Hagrid and Moody's cottage looked more like a small pumpkin pie sprinkled with sugar. The great hall was still packed at morning. These days, even for a simple breakfast, the house elves in the kitchen are constantly creating new and varied delicacies. The food at Hogwarts is a bit greasy. I'm worried my dress won't fit. At the Gryffindor table, Hermione frowned slightly. Before her were black pudding, a kind of blood sausage, and haggis, England's national dish, a rich, flavorful dish made with lamb's stomach, heart, and kidneys. You had your dress custom made? You didn't even tell me. Ginny turned away, her face sad, as if she'd been abandoned. It's not custom made. Seeing Ginny's expression, Hermione decisively shook her head in denial, then explained, I wrote home and asked my mother to buy it at the mall. It's not custom made, and I don't have enough galleons, only British pounds. At the end, Hermione lowered her head in frustration. If possible, she would also like to have a magical evening gown custom made at Fengaya Clothing. Hearing that there were no galleons, Ginny's initially joking expression suddenly turned serious. Why didn't you tell me? I'll trade with you. And if anyone knew that the founder of the Videoscope's girlfriend didn't have galleons to buy a dress, it would be the biggest joke of the year. I don't want to spend his money, Hermione rejected without a second thought. So will you get married? Or do you lack confidence? Ginny quipped, looking at the ring on Hermione's finger. A moonstone ring. When Hermione first brought it home a few days ago, it caused a huge uproar in Gryffindor. She still remembered the girls in the common room. Many of them looked like they had drunk a glass of freshly squeezed lemon juice, each one sour and sarcastic. I'm confident. Though she knew it was a tease, Hermione still answered righteously. Her voice was a little loud, drawing a few sidelong glances from those around her. Okay. I know you're confident. Ginny soothed her softly, as if comforting a frightened pompon. Now, let's talk about dresses. I haven't been to a Muggle mall yet. Are they like Diagon Alley? After a moment's thought, Hermione explained, there are many types of malls. Some are specialty stores, while others, like Diagon Alley, sell everything. Seeing Ginny listening intently, Hermione finished her explanation and promised, "This summer, if you have time, I'll write to you and take you shopping. Then it's a deal." Ginny happily agreed. Perhaps it was a family trait, but she also had a passion for all things Muggle. Soon, the conversation shifted from dresses to malls, cosmetics, and various women's products. Meanwhile, compared to the bustle of the Great Hall, the Slytherin dormitories were far less peaceful. When Ino woke up early in the morning, he found his dorm awash in gifts. To avoid disrupting his daily routine, he could only call for Blue Lantern's help in opening and sorting the presents. As for Draco, he couldn't count on him anymore. After all, he'd become a magazine editor, so busy that he'd barely be seen. After unwrapping a chocolate bar, Blue Lantern's voice suddenly echoed through the room, "Master, I think this requires your personal inspection." A parcel wrapped in brown paper, resembling a book, was held in Blue Lantern's hand. At the same time, Ino frowned slightly at Blue Lantern's prompt. Just now, Blue Lantern hadn't offered to personally inspect a chocolate bar laced with aphrodisiac. Despite his thoughts, he turned to look at the parcel. The outer wrapping was plain khaki brown paper, but surprisingly, it was tinged with a faint, dark aura. However, as soon as this negative emotion arose, it was enveloped by a puff of black smoke. The Boggart, quietly nestling in the shadows, immediately swallowed up the escaping emotion and then quietly merged into the shadow beneath his feet. Phew. I'm done. Please vote. Please vote. By the way, Zia Odie has been conceiving a very interesting story these days. It will be released in about 2 or 3 days. Chapter 349 Snape's Entrustment, The Mysterious Number 7. In a dormitory overflowing with gifts, as the Boggart retreated into the shadows, Ino's frown relaxed. The package wasn't cursed with dark magic as he'd imagined. In fact, it merely carried a faint scent of it. With his concerns reassured, he unwrapped it. As the last layer of parchment was peeled away, a black-covered book lay within, Advanced Dark Magic revealed. Interesting. Looking at the book in his hands, Ino suddenly became intrigued. Receiving a gift like this for Christmas was clearly far superior to a love potion or something. However, just as he was wondering who had the guts to do it, a bewitched envelope slowly emerged from the book's cover. A profound dark magic book, a letter imbued with concealment magic, the two combined would effectively rule out over 95% of wizards. Of the people he knew, only 2 could easily pull off such a feat, Dumbledore and Nicholas Flamel. But given their personalities, it was clear that neither of them would do such a thing. But since he had the letter, he didn't bother to speculate. But as soon as he picked up the envelope, he sensed something unusual. Of course, it wasn't magic, but the thickness of the envelope, suggesting it must contain at least 5 pages of paper. A quarter of an hour later, Ino put down the last page. His expression, relaxed at first, shifted to seriousness and caution. "You actually gave up on Harry and chose old Barty Crouch." The letter, written by Snape, was a bit long, but the content was completely concise. First, Voldemort had been resurrected, and he didn't choose Harry's blood as in the original story. Second, after his resurrection, Voldemort didn't summon the Death Eaters or attempt to break out of Azkaban. Instead, he chose to lie dormant, contrary to his usual style. This particular point was a stark contrast to the original story, and Ino was deeply puzzled by it. Throughout the story, Voldemort's life unfolded. His youthful brilliance, his ambition as a young man, his transformation after 10 years of travel after graduation, including the madness before his death and the neurosis after his resurrection. Ino couldn't help but let himself get caught up in the story's rhythm, attempting to deduce Voldemort's mindset. Honestly, the sudden news left him feeling somewhat uneasy. It was hard to imagine Dumbledore could easily deal with a Voldemort so adept at concealing his true intentions. This truly raised questions. Dumbledore's greatest weakness was his inflexible approach to matters. And Voldemort had already grasped this weakness half a century earlier. Myrtle's death in the original story perfectly illustrates this point. Myrtle died in the castle. Dumbledore couldn't have failed to suspect someone. But in reality, it was a matter easily resolved with legitimacy. The old headmaster stubbornly adhered to his boundaries, preferring to watch Hagrid's wand snap rather than breach his inner resolve and resort to magic or sheer force. Whether Dumbledore's actions were right or wrong was difficult to judge. Perhaps to Muggles, it was pedantic and stubborn. But for wizards, letting go of their mental defenses can be a real problem. Sometimes, Even a single needle prick can have immeasurable consequences later on. Thinking about it this way, if legilimency had been used, Dumbledore might no longer be Dumbledore. But then, Ino's mind shifted to Voldemort. Even as a student, he could manage Dumbledore within the rules. There was no reason he would later plot against him to his death, or even display such neurotic behavior. While the dark arts corroding his mind were certainly a factor, he speculated that it was more likely the changes in Voldemort's personality that were caused by the experiences he encountered during his adult travels. Gradually, Ino began to emulate his own personality, mimicking the changes as best he could. After a long pause, a still image suddenly floated before his eyes. A portrait of the great Muggle scientist, Isaac Newton. Upon closer inspection, Newton's life bore some resemblance to Voldemort's. A renowned scholar in England and around the world, Newton made outstanding contributions to mathematics, physics, astronomy, and even the natural sciences. Sadly, Newton also became mad and even somewhat neurotic in his later years. Speculations abound about the cause of Newton's madness, ranging from overwork to the tragic loss of a loved one, mercury poisoning, and theological beliefs. Ino, however, disagreed. In fact, he preferred the idea that Newton, having reached the pinnacle of scientific achievement, discovered some hidden secret, perhaps even one that overturned the results of his earlier research. It's plausible that a man of exceptional talent, striving since youth or even adolescence, dedicated his entire life to discovering the meaninglessness of it all, would find it all pointless in his later years. Under such extreme joys and sorrows, it's no wonder he went mad. Similarly, after becoming part of Newton's life, Ino gradually discovered clues about Voldemort. Equally brilliant, equally gifted, and even ultimately, equally mad and neurotic. What is Voldemort pursuing? In the quiet of his dorm room, Ino sat on the floor, his chin resting on one hand, quietly pondering the original story. Pure blood, power, domination, glory, these words flashed through his mind, only to be rejected one by one. Suddenly, upon seeing the book Advanced Dark Arts Unveiled sent by Snape, a thought struck him. Horcruxes, immortality. Those in the know are truly mystified. After confirming Voldemort's pursuit, Ino naturally thought of another immortal, Niccolo Flamel. The last time they met in France, Niccolo claimed to have lived 665 years. While it was regrettable that he hadn't met Niccolo's wife, the difference between them couldn't be much greater. And judging by their state when they met, Niccolo probably didn't have much time left. However, comparing the two, an interesting phenomenon emerged. Niccolo and his wife likely wouldn't live past 700, and Voldemort also had only 7 Horcruxes. One sought immortality through the Philosopher's Stone, the other through the Horcruxes. Yet, neither of them achieved the number 7. The difference was that Niccolo had lived for over 600 years and seemed to have achieved a calm acceptance of death. Yet, at the height of his ambition, Voldemort suddenly realized that his lifelong pursuits were nothing but empty dreams, impossible to achieve. Perhaps it was this very blow that transformed the brilliant, intelligent, and learned Tom into the feared, cruel, and ruthless Voldemort. Even if you're resurrected, you should still be desperate. Ino rubbed his brow in confusion. He couldn't understand how someone who should have been mad and volatile could suddenly become rational. Even if he were resurrected, with no hope of immortality, he should be just like the original story, a foolish, mad Dark Lord who knew only revenge and murder. A moment passed, and a possibility occurred to him, but he immediately shook his head in amusement and dismissed it. 7, the most mysterious number in the wizarding world, seemed to symbolize a certain rule. Even Voldemort, a legendary wizard, probably couldn't break it. After all, the history of magic is filled with countless brilliant individuals. Rowena Ravenclaw alone was an insurmountable obstacle. Chapter 350 A Dreamy Christmas Dinner. In the quiet dormitory, Blue Lantern continued to diligently unwrap the presents, the rustling sounds echoing as the packages were torn open. Ino no longer had the heart to open the presents. Although he had just deduced Voldemort's logic, he also understood Snape's predicament. Was Snape a brilliant man? Undoubtedly, he could even be described as brilliant. A brilliant man who had spent over a decade with Voldemort, if he still had any sense, would naturally notice the difference. Snape's letter, while seemingly a comment on the current situation, was essentially a request in a request. At the end, Snape directly offered the key to Gringotts' vault. While the potions master's half-life accumulation might not be all, it must have been a considerable sum. Time slipped by quietly. Concerned, Ino chose not to leave the dormitory for the rest of the day. He had Blue Lantern prepare some food for lunch, and the rest of the day was spent in deep thought. If possible, he still wanted to help Snape within his ability. It was best to repay a debt of gratitude. Before he knew it, the sky had gradually darkened. It was 6 o'clock in the afternoon. Ino stood up and walked towards the wardrobe in the dormitory. Inside were many formal clothes prepared by the Ministry of Magic for the Quidditch concert. Although he only wore one set at the time, the rest had been packed up and given away by Bagman as a favor. In his words, they were all tailor-made, and it would be a waste not to accept them. Thinking as he did so, Ino slowly opened the wardrobe door. He chose a robe with a silver-gray silk main fabric and lavender vine-shaped embroidery on the cuffs and hem. After dressing neatly, he pushed open the door to the dormitory. Tonight, Hogwarts seemed particularly gorgeous. The young wizards no longer wore black robes. The castle was filled with colorful evening gowns. At first glance, it looked like a medieval palace dinner. Gryffindor common room. Harry sat alone on the sofa, bored and waiting for his dance partner. As for the others, both Ron and Neville had left the common room early in the morning. "Sorry, Harry. I kept you waiting," Ginny called from the girls' dormitory stairs. Harry quickly turned around. But upon first glance, he had to admit, Ginny seemed completely different overnight. Her form-fitting purple evening gown accentuated her exquisite figure, and her long, curly red hair, every curve, seemed to highlight her youthful charm. "Oh, Ginny, so beautiful." Harry broke off 3 times mid-sentence. Though he stumbled, he managed to get the basic message across. Seeing Harry's stunned expression, Ginny couldn't help but chuckle. "All right, let's go. The warriors will open the dance." 7 o'clock in the evening. The 2 towering oak doors of the Great Hall opened, and the once familiar scene was long gone. In its place, a dreamlike place, like a starry sky. The purple ceiling, scattered stars, and fluttering fairies, ranging from 1 to 5 inches in size, resembled fairy tale spirits. Their colorful wings fluttered, painting beautiful rainbows across the Great Hall. The walls surrounding the Great Hall seemed enchanted. Where once bare, they were now covered with 3-foot-tall Christmas trees, topped with 5 pointed stars radiating orange light. There were estimated to be at least hundreds of these Christmas trees, perfectly replacing the hall's candlesticks and providing illumination. Of course, these miniature Christmas trees weren't just for illumination. They were also festooned with Honeydukes candies. Whenever a young wizard tapped the wall with their wand, a random candy would drop from the tree. In the Great Hall, Harry stared at the dreamlike scene before him, unable to find the words to describe it. Suddenly, Harry noticed a silence behind him. His long training with Moody had made him turn around with caution, keeping Ginny behind him. But looking back, he relaxed his guard again. Not far away, Ino was walking towards them with an elegant and beautiful girl. "Who? That's Hermione." Noticing Harry's gaze, Ginny turned her head and blew a breath into her ear. The strange feeling in her ear made Harry stop watching, but he was still surprised that Hermione had this side to her. Outside the hall door, Hermione walked slowly, holding Ino's arm. She was graceful and every step seemed to be on point. She wore a pair of 3-inch black high heels, and with her gently swaying skirt, she looked indescribably elegant and graceful. As for her dress, it was a light blue slim-fitting long dress. The dress seemed to have been revised, as the slit and backless elements had been removed. Even so, among the many retro-style dresses, the style of this long dress was novel and beautiful, especially when paired with a moonstone necklace on her chest. A moonstone, the size of a pigeon egg, shone with a shimmering white light. Paired with her pale blue dress, she looked like Artemis, the goddess of the moon, stepping out of a painting. Horizontal ellipsis. Hermione's beauty was breathtaking, but she didn't command the attention alone, as many of the girls' attention was drawn to her. Perhaps Ino's usual black robes, coupled with his occasional reclusiveness, had given rise to a stereotype. But today, his sudden change of attire struck many as a striking contrast. Ino, clad in a silver-gray satin robe, stood beneath the purple starry ceiling, reflecting an enchanting, dazzling light. His handsome appearance, pure amber eyes, and warm smile captivated many girls. Of course, as they admired him, the girls also grabbed a video camera. Horizontal ellipsis. At 8 o'clock in the evening, Professor McGonagall and the other 2 headmasters entered the venue. Surprisingly, Dumbledore, who was supposed to appear, was nowhere to be seen. Even if Dumbledore wasn't in attendance, few would have cared. After all, everyone's attention was focused on the ball that was about to begin. "Champions and partners, please come this way," Professor McGonagall called out, and the 4 champions slowly walked onto the stage. Remarkably, Ino wore the same dress as Fleur. The Frenchwoman was also wearing a silver grey evening gown. Feeling the strength of his arm, Ino smiled silently, then, in full view of the crowd, lightly tapped her finger on the cuff. The silver grey dress instantly transformed into sea blue that matched Hermione's. In the middle of the stage, Hermione pursed her lips slightly, a flicker of pride in her eyes. The champions of the Triwizard Tournament performed the opening dance. It was tradition. As the champions entered the stage, Professor Flitwick, standing on a stool, waved his wand. Before him stood an array of enchanted instruments. The charms professor, like a conductor, swayed his wand, and a rhythmic waltz began to flow. The moment the music started, Ino took Hermione's hand. Their moonstone rings touched. Above them, about 2 feet above, the sky shone with a white halo like moonlight, and tiny specks of light fell like snowflakes. This dance music is called First Encounter, the hit song by the Weird Sisters, Ino whispered in Hermione's ear as they danced. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.